The dusty Arizona wind carried screams that day, screams of a woman being sold like cattle, her identity hidden beneath a filthy burlap sack. When the richest, cruelest man in the territory raised his hand to claim her, a lone cowboy made a choice that would change both their lives forever. What he saw when he lifted that sack made his heart stop. But saving her was just the beginning, because the men who sold her wanted her back, and they were coming with guns loaded and vengeance burning hot. Stay with me until the end of this incredible true story of courage, redemption, and love born from the ashes of cruelty. And please, comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. The sun hung merciless over Silver Creek, Arizona territory that October afternoon in 1878, beating down on the town square where humanity's worst instincts gathered to do their ugly business. Dust devils spiraled between the wooden buildings, carrying the stench of unwashed bodies, horse manure, and something else, something darker that Elias Boone couldn't quite name as he stood at the edge of the crowd, his weathered hands resting on the hitching post outside McGreevy's general store. He'd come to town for supplies: salt pork, coffee, ammunition, the ordinary necessities that kept a man alive on a hardscrabble ranch 30 miles from civilization. He hadn't come for this. Nobody with any decency in their soul would come for this. But here it was, happening in broad daylight, sanctioned by a corrupt sheriff who stood picking his teeth on the jailhouse steps while human beings were paraded and sold like livestock in the town square. The auction, they called it, as if putting a proper name on evil made it respectable. Elias had heard about these gatherings, whispered about in saloons, mentioned in passing by travelers who'd seen too much of the territory's dark underbelly. The Red Scarf Gang had been raiding wagon trains along the California Trail for 2 years now, killing the men, taking whatever they wanted, and selling what was left to the highest bidder in towns where law wore a badge but carried no honor. Silver Creek had become one of those towns. Sheriff Briggs took his cut, the auctioneer got his percentage, and decent people looked the other way because speaking up meant becoming the next target. But Elias Boone had never been particularly good at looking away. He was 42 years old, tall and lean as a fence post, with gray threading through his dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes from decades of squinting at the unforgiving Arizona sun. His hands were calloused, his boots worn, his clothes clean but patched. He looked like what he was, a man who'd worked hard for everything he had and expected nothing from anyone. The Double B Ranch, named for his parents Benjamin and Beatrice, sat in a valley carved by Willow Creek, blessed with water and a land that hoarded it jealously. He ran 100 head of cattle, 3 horses, and enough chickens to keep him in eggs. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and it was his. He'd been alone there for 2 years, since the fever took Margaret. He tried not to think about Margaret, but out here in this crowd, watching this obscenity unfold, he couldn't help but remember how she'd hated cruelty in all its forms, how she'd once walked 3 miles in the rain to bring medicine to a Pima family whose child was sick, despite her own father warning her that those people had their own ways. How she'd stood up to the previous sheriff when he tried to run a Mexican family out of town, her blue eyes blazing with righteous fury that made men twice her size back down. Margaret would have burned this whole town to the ground before she'd let this auction continue. The thought made his jaw tighten as the auctioneer, a rail-thin man named Cyrus Polk with a voice like a crow and morals to match, dragged the next lot onto the platform. "Gentlemen," Polk crowed, his stained vest straining across his narrow chest, "we have here a fine specimen, young, strong enough to work, and I'm told she's got some education too, for those of you looking for something more than field labor." The crowd laughed, a sound that made Elias's stomach turn. There were maybe 40 men gathered in the square, ranging from rough miners still dusty from their claims to well-dressed businessmen who'd probably tell their wives they were at a town council meeting. All of them complicit, all of them guilty. The woman stumbled as Polk shoved her toward center stage. She wore a dress that had once been fine. Elias could see that much, but was now torn and filthy, stained with rust-colored marks that he hoped was just dirt, but feared was blood. Her feet were bare, cut and bleeding, and her hands were bound with rough hemp rope that had worn grooves into her wrists. But it was the sack that made rage bloom hot and red behind Elias's eyes. They'd pulled a burlap feed sack over her head, tied it around her neck with twine, dehumanizing her completely. She couldn't see, could barely breathe through the rough fabric. She swayed on her feet, disoriented, and when she stumbled, nearly falling off the platform, the crowd laughed again. "Careful there, honey," someone shouted. "Save that falling for the bedroom." More laughter. Elias's hands curled into fists. He should leave. He knew that. This wasn't his business, wasn't his fight. He had a ranch to run, cattle that needed moving to winter pasture, a barn roof that wouldn't fix itself. Getting involved in something like this, something that had Sheriff Briggs's blessing and the Red Scarf Gang's backing, was a good way to end up face down in an arroyo with a bullet in his back. But his feet wouldn't move. Margaret's voice echoed in his memory. "Evil triumphs when good men do nothing, Elias." "Let's start the bidding at $50, Polk announced, grabbing the woman's arm and yanking her forward. She made a sound, not quite a scream, more like a wounded animal, and tried to pull away, but Polk's grip was iron. "50, called out a miner Elias didn't recognize. "60, came another voice. "75. That was Thomas Brennan, who owned the lumber mill and had buried 3 wives already. Town gossip said they'd all died of accidents, but nobody asked too many questions when you had money. The woman's shoulders shook. Even through the sack, Elias could see her trembling, could imagine the terror that must be coursing through her veins. She had no idea who was bidding on her, no idea what fate awaited, could only stand there blind and helpless, while men decided her future like she was a horse or a plow. $100! The new voice cut through the square like a knife, and the crowd parted slightly. Elias didn't need to see to know who it was. That cultured drawl, dripping with money and malice, belonged to Jebediah Wallace. Jeb Wallace was everything wrong with the territory condensed into one man. He owned the Silver Creek mine and half the town with it, had a ranch that sprawled across 10,000 acres worked by hands who were barely better than slaves, and a reputation for cruelty that made even hardened outlaws nervous. He was 35, handsome in a cold way, with slicked-back dark hair, expensive suits shipped from San Francisco, and eyes like chips of black ice. He'd had 3 wives in the 4 years since he'd arrived in the territory. 2 had disappeared without explanation. The third had been found at the bottom of a ravine, her neck broken. Tragic riding accident, the inquest had ruled, despite the bruises on her arms and the fact that she'd been terrified of horses. Nobody investigated Jeb Wallace. His money made sure of that. Now he stood at the front of the crowd, thumbs hooked in his vest pockets, a thin smile playing across his lips as he watched the woman shake on the platform. $100, he repeated, looking around as if daring anyone to challenge him. Going once? Twice? Elias found himself moving before his brain could catch up with his legs. He pushed through the crowd, ignoring the muttered complaints and angry glares, until he stood in clear view of the platform. $500. His voice rang clear and steady across the square. The crowd went silent, so quiet you could hear the wind rattling the loose boards on the saloon across the street. Polk's mouth fell open. Sheriff Briggs straightened from his lazy slouch, suddenly paying attention, and Jeb Wallace slowly turned, his black eyes fixing on Elias with an intensity that would have made a smart man reconsider. Elias had never claimed to be particularly smart about these things. "Did you say 500?" Polk managed, his voice cracking slightly. "You heard me." "That's—" Polk swallowed, calculating quickly. His percentage of $500 was more than he usually made in a month. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Boone." Elias Boone. Wallace's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those cold eyes. "That's quite a bid for a pig in a poke, Boone. You haven't even seen what you're buying." "Don't need to. 500, cash." Elias patted his vest pocket where his savings rested. Money he'd been planning to use to buy breeding stock from Kansas. Margaret had always wanted to improve their herd. Well, she'd understand this expense better than anyone. "Perhaps you should reconsider," Wallace said, his voice still smooth but with an edge underneath like a blade hidden in velvet. "I had my heart set on this particular lot, and I don't like being disappointed." "Then you should have bid higher." The 2 men stared at each other across the dusty square. The moment stretched, taut as a rope about to snap. Elias could feel the weight of every eye in the crowd, could sense the violence coiled beneath Wallace's civilized veneer. Finally, Wallace smiled, a thin, cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Well played, Mr. Boone. But do take good care of your purchase. These roads can be dangerous. Accidents happen." The threat wasn't even veiled. Elias met his gaze steadily. "I'll keep that in mind." Polk, sensing the tension might explode into something that would interrupt his profit, quickly banged his gavel on the makeshift podium. "Sold! To Mr. Elias Boone for $500. Pay the cashier. Claim your purchase." The crowd began to disperse, many of them shooting curious glances at Elias as they wandered back toward the saloons and shops. Wallace lingered a moment longer, his gaze calculating, before finally turning and walking away, his two ever-present hired guns falling into step behind him. Elias didn't watch him go. He was already climbing onto the platform, fishing money from his vest pocket and handing it to the nervous clerk who served as Polk's cashier. The man counted it twice, bit two of the coins to verify they were real gold, then nodded and scurried away before he could get caught in whatever storm was brewing. Only then did Elias turn to the woman. She stood perfectly still, her whole body rigid with fear. He could hear her breathing, quick, shallow gasps muffled by the burlap. Up close he could see how young she was from the smoothness of her bound hands, probably not more than 23 or 24. Could see the cuts on her feet, the bruises on her arms, the way her dress had been torn at the shoulder. "Ma'am," he said softly, keeping his voice gentle despite the rage still burning in his gut. "My name is Elias Boone. I'm going to cut your hands free now, and then I'm going to remove that sack. I give you my word, I will not hurt you. Do you understand?" She nodded, just barely, a tiny movement that told him she'd heard but wasn't sure if she should believe. He pulled his knife from his belt, a good Bowie knife his father had given him, the handle worn smooth from decades of use, and carefully slid the blade between her wrists and the rope. The hemp parted with a whisper, and he heard her gasp as circulation returned to her hands. "Can you feel your fingers?" he asked. Another nod, and this time she flexed her hands, wincing at what must have been painful pins and needles. "Good. Now, I'm going to remove the sack. Close your eyes first. The sun will be bright. Ready?" He didn't wait for an answer. He reached up and carefully worked the twine loose from around her neck, taking care not to pull her hair, then gently lifted the burlap sack up and away, and stopped breathing. Time seemed to suspend itself the way it does in those rare moments when the universe decides to pay attention. The afternoon sun caught in her hair as it tumbled free, auburn, deep and rich as mahogany wood, shot through with threads of copper and gold that seemed to glow in the harsh light. It fell past her shoulders in waves, tangled and dirty, but glorious nonetheless. But it was her face that made his heart forget how to beat. She was beautiful, not in the delicate porcelain way of the women in catalog pictures, but in a way that suggested strength and intelligence and depths that would take a lifetime to explore. High cheekbones dusted with freckles, a straight nose, lips pressed together in fear, but full and expressive. Dirt smudged her face, bruises marked her jaw and temple, but none of it could hide the light that lived in her features. And her eyes, God, her eyes. She opened them slowly, squinting against the sun as he'd warned, and Elias found himself looking into eyes the color of leaves in spring, green and alive and full of a spirit that all this horror hadn't managed to extinguish. They were red from crying, surrounded by shadows of exhaustion and trauma, but they held his gaze with an intensity that suggested she was seeing right down into his soul. "An angel," he whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it. She blinked, and he saw a flicker of confusion cross her face, quickly replaced by wariness. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but educated, carrying the crisp pronunciation of the East Coast. "Are you going to hurt me?" The question hit him like a physical blow. That she even had to ask, that she'd been reduced to a state where that was her first concern, it made him want to hunt down every man in that Red Scarf gang and make them understand what they'd done. "Never," he said, and the word came out fiercer than he'd intended. He forced his voice softer. "Not a soul will touch you again. You have my word on that, and I'm a man who keeps his word." She studied his face, and he let her, standing perfectly still while those green eyes searched for any hint of deception. He didn't know what she saw, a worn-out rancher with gray in his hair and calluses on his hands, probably, but after a long moment, some of the tension left her shoulders. "Why?" she asked simply. Because it was the right thing to do. That man... She glanced toward where Wallace had stood and Elias saw fear flash across her face. He'll be angry. Let him. You don't understand. I heard them talking, the men who took me. They said Jeb Wallace always gets what he wants, that he kills anyone who crosses him. Then I guess I'll be the first exception to that rule. She shook her head, and tears suddenly spilled down her cheeks. Not the desperate, hysterical tears of panic, but the quiet tears of someone who'd been strong for too long and had finally found a moment to break. You're a fool, she whispered. A kind fool, but a fool nonetheless. You should have let him have me. At least then only one of us would suffer. Elias reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and gently wiped the tears from her cheek with his thumb. What's your name? She hesitated, then answered. Clara Morgan. Well, Miss Morgan, I'm not in the habit of letting decent people suffer, no matter what the cost to me. Now, can you walk? My horse is at the hitching post, and I'd like to get you out of this town before Wallace decides to test my patience further. Clara looked down at her bleeding feet, then back up at him, and he saw something shift in her eyes. A decision being made, a choice to trust, however tentatively. I can walk, she said. But when she tried to step forward, her legs buckled. Elias caught her before she could fall, one arm around her waist, the other steadying her elbow. She weighed almost nothing. They'd clearly starved her during captivity. Or perhaps I'll carry you, he said quietly. Before she could protest, he bent and lifted her into his arms. She stiffened, every muscle in her body going rigid, and he felt her heart hammering against his chest like a trapped bird. Easy, he murmured, the same tone he'd use with a spooked horse. Just to the hitching post. I promise. She didn't relax, but she didn't fight either, and he took that as permission. He stepped down from the platform and began walking through the square toward where his horse waited. People stared. Of course they did. He'd just spent $500 on a woman at an illegal auction, defied Jeb Wallace in the process, and was now carrying her through town like a groom, carrying his bride over a threshold. By nightfall, every person within 50 miles would know about it. He didn't care. Sheriff Briggs pushed off from the jailhouse wall as Elias passed. Boone! He called out, his voice carrying a warning. Don't cause trouble! Elias didn't even slow down. Then stop creating situations where good people have to clean up your messes, Briggs. The sheriff's face darkened, but he didn't follow. He was crooked as a dog's hind leg, but he wasn't stupid. Elias Boone might be a quiet rancher who kept to himself. But everyone in the territory knew he'd ridden with the Arizona Rangers before he settled down. Knew he'd been at Bloody Basin and come out alive when most of his company hadn't. Knew that the quiet ones were the most dangerous when pushed. At the hitching post, Elias's horse, a big buckskin gelding named Smoke, waited patiently, tail swishing at flies. The horse turned his head to investigate, nostrils flaring at Clara's scent, then seemed to accept her presence with the calm that had made him Elias's favorite mount for the past 8 years. Can you sit a horse? Elias asked Clara. She nodded. I used to ride before... She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. He set her down carefully, keeping one hand on her arm until he was sure she could stand, then untied Smoke's reins from the post. We'll ride double until we're clear of town. It's not proper, I know, but... Proper? Clara laughed, and it was a broken sound that hurt to hear. I think we're well past worrying about proper, Mr. Boone. He wanted to argue, to tell her that just because the world had treated her improperly didn't mean he would, but she was right. They needed to move. He swung up into the saddle, then reached down. Give me your hand. She hesitated only a moment before placing her small, battered hand in his. He pulled, she pushed, and then she was settling behind him on Smoke's broad back, her arms wrapping tentatively around his waist. Hold tight, he said, and urged Smoke into a walk. They moved through Silver Creek at a measured pace, fast enough to show they weren't afraid, slow enough not to look like they were running. People watched from windows and doorways, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Elias felt Clara's grip tighten every time someone stared, felt her press closer to his back as if trying to make herself invisible. Near the edge of town, movement caught his eye. Jeb Wallace stood on the porch of the Grand Hotel, a whiskey glass in his hand, watching them pass. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and Wallace raised his glass in a mocking salute, that cold smile playing across his face again. Elias didn't acknowledge it. He just kept smoke moving, steady and sure, until the last building of Silver Creek fell behind them and they were out on the open road. Only then did he feel Clara's death grip on his waist ease slightly. "How far to your ranch?" she asked, her voice small. "About 4 hours at an easy pace. We'll stop at Willow Springs to water the horse and let you rest." 4 hours, she repeated, and he heard the exhaustion in those 2 words. "Can you make it?" "I'll make it." There was steel beneath the weariness. "I've survived this long. A few more hours won't kill me." They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds, the steady rhythm of Smoke's hooves, the creak of leather, and the whisper of wind through the scrub brush that dotted the landscape. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Finally, Clara spoke again. "Why did you do it? Really? You don't know me. I could be anyone. A thief? A liar? You're someone who needed help," Elias interrupted gently. "That's all I needed to know. But $500? That's money well spent." She was quiet for another mile, then asked, "What happens now? What do you expect from me?" He heard the fear beneath the question, understood what she was really asking. "Nothing you don't want to give," he said firmly. "When we get to the ranch, I'll give you my room. I'll sleep by the fire in the main room. You'll have privacy, a lock on the door, and tomorrow I'll ride to Fort Verde and send a telegram to your family if you have one. If you want to stay until arrangements can be made, you're welcome. If you want to leave sooner, I'll take you wherever you need to go. And if you have nowhere to go," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "then you can stay as long as you need. I have a small place, but it's honest work and clean living. You'd be safe." "Safe," she whispered, and the word seemed to break something inside her. Her arms tightened around his waist again, and he felt wetness soak through the back of his shirt as she quietly cried. He didn't try to stop her or offer useless comfort. He just kept Smoke moving steady and sure toward home, toward safety, toward whatever future they could build from this moment. Behind them, the dust of Silver Creek settled back into silence, but Elias Boone knew, with the certainty that comes from living in hard country, that this wasn't over. Men like Jeb Wallace didn't forgive slights to their pride, and money would only protect you for so long. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, he'd done what Margaret would have wanted. He'd stood up when it mattered. He'd saved someone who couldn't save herself. And when he'd lifted that sack and seen Clara Morgan's face, her angel's face, something in his chest that had been frozen since Margaret died had shifted, cracked, and let in the smallest sliver of light. Not love. Not yet. But perhaps the possibility of it. Perhaps that was enough for now. The sun slipped lower. Shadows stretched long across the desert, and Elias Boone rode toward home with an angel holding tight to his back, and tomorrow's troubles waiting on the horizon like storm clouds gathering before rain. The sun had dipped below the mesa by the time Smoke's hooves found the narrow trail that led down into Willow Creek Valley. Clara had stopped crying an hour back, but she hadn't spoken either, and Elias could feel the exhaustion radiating from her body where it pressed against his back. She was holding on through sheer willpower now, her arms loose around his waist, her head occasionally drooping forward to rest between his shoulder blades before she'd jerk herself awake again. "Almost there," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if she heard him. "Just over this rise." The valley opened before them like a promise kept. Even in the fading light, it was beautiful. A green slash through the brown landscape where Willow Creek carved its patient way through rock and sand. Cottonwood trees lined the water, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze, and beyond them sat the Double B Ranch. It wasn't much to look at, Elias knew. The main house was small, 2 rooms plus a loft, built from adobe and timber his father had cut from the mountains 20 miles north. The barn leaned slightly to the west, a problem he kept meaning to fix. A chicken coop, a corral with split-rail fencing, a storage shed, and a root cellar completed the compound. Compared to the grand ranches that sprawled across other parts of the territory, it was barely a homestead. But it was home. And more importantly, it was safe. Clara stirred as Smoke picked his way down the slope. "Is that it?" she asked, her voice thick with fatigue. That's it. Not much, but the roof doesn't leak and the well never runs dry. It's beautiful, she said, and he heard genuine wonder in her voice. There's so much green. He'd forgotten she'd spent weeks, maybe months in captivity, probably kept in some dry camp where the only green was the mold on stale bread. Even his modest ranch must look like paradise after that. Smoke knew he was home and picked up his pace without being asked, heading straight for the barn where grain and rest awaited. Elias let him have his head, guiding him only enough to stop by the front porch of the house rather than at the barn. Let me help you down first, Elias said, swinging his right leg over Smoke's neck and sliding to the ground. He turned and reached up. Come on, I've got you. Clara hesitated, swaying in the saddle, and for a moment he thought she might pass out right there. Then she leaned forward, putting her hands on his shoulders, and let him lift her down. Her feet hit the ground and her legs gave out completely. Elias caught her, one arm around her waist, the other behind her knees, and lifted her again. This time she didn't stiffen. She simply let her head fall against his chest, too exhausted to care any more about propriety or fear or anything except the desperate need to stop moving. I've got you, he repeated, and carried her up the 3 steps to the porch. The front door wasn't locked. It never was. Out here, you were more likely to need to welcome a desperate traveler than worry about thieves. He shouldered it open and stepped into the cool darkness of the main room. It smelled like home, wood smoke and coffee, leather, and the faint lavender scent from the dried herbs Margaret had hung from the rafters before she died. Elias had never taken them down. He wasn't sure he could. I'll light a lamp in a moment, he said, carrying Clara across the room to the door that led to the bedroom. But first, let's get you settled. He pushed open the bedroom door with his foot. The room was small but clean, dominated by the bed his father had built. Solid pine with a corn husk mattress that Margaret had recovered just before the fever took her. A simple dresser stood against one wall, a washstand with a chipped basin against another. A single window looked out toward the creek, currently showing only the deep blue of twilight. Elias set Clara down gently on the edge of the bed. She swayed but managed to stay upright, her hands gripping the quilt to steady herself. I'll bring you water and something to eat, he said. There's clean clothes in the dresser. They were my sister-in-law's. She left them here when she and my brother moved to California 5 years back. Might be a little big on you, but they're clean and whole. Clara looked up at him, and even in the dim light he could see the confusion in her eyes. Your bedroom, she said. This is your room. Where will you sleep? By the fire. I've done it before when I was too tired to make it to bed after a long day. It's comfortable enough. I can't take your bed. Yes, you can. He softened his tone. Please, let me do this one thing right. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you, she whispered. I can't begin to. You don't have to thank me. Just rest. I'll be right outside if you need anything. The door locks from the inside. There's a bar you can drop across it if it makes you feel safer. He saw relief flash across her face at that, and it made his chest ache. What had they done to her that the simple promise of a locked door brought such comfort? He left before she could see the anger on his face, closing the door quietly behind him. In the main room, he stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the darkness, letting the familiar surroundings settle the rage that kept threatening to boil over. Then he moved with the efficient economy of a man who'd lived alone for 2 years. He lit the lamp on the table, got the fire going in the stone hearth, put coffee on to boil. From the root cellar, he brought up bread he'd baked 3 days ago, a jar of preserved peaches, some hard cheese, and smoked venison. It wasn't fancy, but it was food, and she needed food. He poured water from the bucket by the door into a pitcher, found Margaret's good basin, the one without chips, and set both on a tray with a clean cloth. Then he knocked softly on the bedroom door. Miss Morgan, I have water and food. Silence. Then, just a moment. He heard rustling inside, footsteps, and then the door opened a crack. Clara had changed into one of the dresses from the dresser, a simple calico print in blue that did indeed hang loose on her thin frame, but was infinitely better than the torn, filthy rag she'd been wearing. She'd attempted to clean her face, though smudges of dirt still marked her temples where she'd missed. She looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. and so very, very tired. "May I come in?" he asked. She opened the door wider, stepping back. He entered and set the tray on the dresser, then turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Please don't go yet." He turned back. She stood in the center of the room, arms wrapped around herself, looking lost. "I don't want to be alone," she admitted quietly. "I know that's improper. I know I shouldn't ask, but I've been alone with my thoughts for so long, and Her voice broke. "I don't want to be alone." Elias's heart twisted. "I'll stay," he said, "but the door stays open, and I'll sit here." He pulled the chair from the corner and positioned it just inside the doorway, close enough that she wouldn't feel abandoned, far enough to be proper. "You eat and rest, and I'll just sit right here. That sound acceptable?" Relief washed across her face. "Yes. Thank you." She moved to the dresser and picked up the bread, breaking off a small piece. He watched her eat slowly, mechanically, as if she'd forgotten how to take pleasure in food and was only feeding herself because her body demanded it. "How long?" he asked gently. "How long were you with them?" Clara was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "I'm not entirely sure," she finally said. "Time became strange, but I think 6 weeks, maybe 7. Can you tell me what happened? You don't have to if it's too hard, but if I'm going to help you, I need to understand." She set down the bread and picked up the water, drinking deeply before answering. "I was traveling from Boston," she said, her voice distant, as if she was watching the story unfold rather than living in it. "My father died 3 months ago. Heart apoplexy, the doctors said. He was a physician, ironically. Treated everyone in our neighborhood, worked himself to exhaustion during the diphtheria outbreak 2 years back, and never quite recovered." "I'm sorry," Elias said quietly. She nodded, acknowledging his sympathy. "When he died, I discovered the truth. He'd spent everything paying for my education. I'd attended Miss Porter's school, you see, and then had a year at the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. Father always said money wasn't important, that education was the greatest gift he could give me. I didn't realize he meant it quite so literally." "He went into debt for your schooling?" "Considerable debt. The creditors came 2 weeks after the funeral. They took everything, the house, the furniture, his medical instruments, everything except my clothes and my medical books. I had an aunt in San Francisco, my mother's sister, who wrote and said I could live with her. She sent money for passage on the wagon train. I thought—" Clara's laugh was bitter. "I thought I was so lucky. A new start in California, a chance to use my education to help people. I was practically giddy with optimism. What happened? We were 3 weeks out of St. Louis when they hit us. The Red Scarf Gang, though I didn't know that's what they were called until later. It was just before dawn. Most people were still sleeping. The guards tried to fight, but—" She closed her eyes, and Elias saw her hands begin to shake. "They killed them all. The wagon master, the guards, most of the men. They took the younger women and children. The older women, they—" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They didn't let them live." "Jesus," Elias breathed. "There were 5 of us they kept. 3 women and 2 girls, sisters. Couldn't have been more than 12 and 14. They tied us up, threw us in a wagon, and drove for days. We stopped at different places, camps, towns, places where law was just a word people used but didn't mean. They sold the little girls first." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I tried to stop it. I fought them, screamed that it was wrong, that those were children. One of the men, the leader, I think, with a red bandana across his face, he hit me so hard I saw stars, told me the next time I caused trouble, he'd cut out my tongue." Elias's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. "Did he hurt you? Did any of them—" "No," Claire said quickly. "Not like that. They said I was worth more intact, that men paid better for innocence." She practically spat the last word. "As if innocence could survive what I witnessed, what I lived through." "But you did survive," Elias said firmly. "You're here. You're safe now." "Am I?" She looked at him with those haunted green eyes. "That man today, Wallace. You don't know what men like him are capable of." "Actually, I do." Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I've known men like Jeb Wallace my whole life. Rich, powerful, used to getting their way and crushing anyone who opposes them. But here's the thing they never understand. Money doesn't make you bulletproof. Power doesn't make you invincible. And there's always someone who won't bow down, no matter how much you threaten them. And that someone is you? If it needs to be. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You're either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Boone. Most likely both, Miss Morgan. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The first real expression of anything other than fear or pain he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger, more like the woman she must have been before the world had showed her its cruelest edges. Please, she said, call me Clara. After everything, formality seems ridiculous. Only if you call me Elias. Elias, she repeated, testing the name. It's old-fashioned. My mother liked the Bible. Elijah was taken, so she settled for Elias. It suits you. She picked up the bread again, taking a larger bite this time. Strong, steady, reliable. That's the most excitement anyone's attributed to my name in 42 years. This time her smile was more genuine. I suspect there's more excitement in you than you let on, Elias Boone. You did just outbid the richest man in the territory and threaten him in front of half the town. I didn't threaten him. I just made it clear I wasn't afraid of him. That's the same thing to men like Wallace. She finished the bread and started on the cheese. Color was beginning to return to her cheeks, and her hands had stopped shaking quite so badly. You should know, before they brought me to Silver Creek, I heard the men talking. The Red Scarf Gang has a base camp somewhere in the Superstition Mountains. There are at least 20 of them, maybe more, and they have an arrangement with Wallace. He gives them money and information about wagon trains. They give him first pick of whatever they take. Elias felt cold fury settle in his gut. How long has this been going on? I don't know, but from the way they talked about it, it's not new. They've hit dozens of wagon trains, sold hundreds of people. She set down the cheese, suddenly looking ill. And nobody stops them because Wallace owns the sheriff and half the territorial government. Not for long, Elias said grimly. Elias found us sons. Fort Verde has a telegraph. I can contact the marshal's office in Tucson, the governor in Prescott. Hell, I can contact the War Department in Washington if I have to. They'll kill you before you can send a message. They can try. Clara shook her head, fresh tears welling in her eyes. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. You could have walked away in that town square, kept your money, kept your safety. Why risk everything for a stranger? Elias was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for something he didn't entirely understand himself. 2 years ago, he finally said, my wife died of fever. Margaret. She was... He paused, his throat tight. She was the best person I ever knew. Kind, brave, stubborn as a mule when she believed in something. She spent her life standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. When she got sick, when I knew she wasn't going to make it, she made me promise something. What? She made me promise I wouldn't let her death turn me bitter, that I wouldn't give up on people just because the world had taken her away. She said, he had to stop, had to breathe through the memory. She said the world needs good people to stay good, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Clara's eyes were soft with sympathy. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was. And when I saw you standing on that platform today, with that sack over your head, being sold like you were nothing, he met her gaze. I heard Margaret's voice clear as day, asking me what kind of man I wanted to be. And I realized I couldn't walk away. Not from you. Not from what was right. So I didn't. Silence filled the room, broken only by the crackle of the fire in the other room and the distant sound of coyotes calling to each other across the valley. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then did something Elias didn't expect. She laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh, more like the sound of someone who'd been holding tension for so long that it had to escape somehow. But it was genuine. Your wife would have liked me, I think, Clara said. I've never been very good at accepting the way things are when they're wrong. My father used to say I had too much spine and not enough sense. Sounds like you come by your stubbornness honestly. Apparently we have that in common. She finished the cheese and moved on to the preserved peaches, eating more naturally now. What happens tomorrow, Elias? Truly? Tomorrow I ride to Fort Verde. I send those telegrams. I let people know what's happening in Silver Creek. Then I come back here and we figure out the next step. And if Wallace comes before you return? He won't. Elias said it with more confidence than he felt. He's too smart to make a move that fast. He'll wait, plan, try to find a way to get to you without implicating himself. That gives us time. Time for what? Time to make sure you're safe. Time to contact your aunt in San Francisco, see if she can still take you in. Time to... He hesitated. Time to teach you how to use a gun, if you're willing to learn. Clara's eyes widened. A gun? I won't always be here to protect you. You should know how to protect yourself. My wife did. Margaret could shoot better than half the men in this territory. Saved my life once when a rattlesnake struck at me and she put a bullet through its head from 20 feet away. I've never even held a gun. Then it's time you learned. He stood up, stretching muscles that had been still too long. But that's for tomorrow. Tonight, you need to rest. Eat what you want from that tray. Use the water to clean up, and then sleep. I'll be right outside if you need anything. Elias? She stood as well, setting down the jar of peaches. Thank you for everything. I know I keep saying it, but I don't know how else to express what you've done for me. You don't have to express anything. Just get well. That's thanks enough. He moved toward the door, but her voice stopped him again. One more thing. You said your wife was the best person you ever knew, but you're wrong. He turned back. What do you mean? I mean, she would say you're the best person she ever knew, and she'd be right. Clara's smile was sad but genuine. Sleep well, Elias Boone. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just nodded and left, closing the door softly behind him. He heard the bar drop into place. She'd taken him up on the lock, and felt both relieved and pained by it. Relieved that she felt safe enough to sleep, pained that she needed a locked door to feel that way. In the main room, Elias went through the motions of settling for the night. He brought Smoke in from where he'd left him by the porch, got him settled in the barn with grain and water, checked on the chickens and the cattle in the far pasture. Everything was as it should be, peaceful, quiet, normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. He returned to the house and stood on the porch for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one over the dark mountains. Somewhere out there, the Red Scarf Gang was camped, probably celebrating another successful sale. Somewhere out there, Jeb Wallace was plotting his revenge. And somewhere out there, other Clara Morgans were suffering, waiting for someone to help them. For the first time since Margaret's death, Elias felt the stirring of something beyond simple survival. Purpose. Direction. A reason to be more than just a man going through the motions of living. He went back inside, banking the fire and rolling out his bedroll near the hearth. He didn't bother undressing. He wanted to be ready if trouble came in the night. He lay down, his rifle within easy reach, and stared at the ceiling beams Margaret had helped him raise all those years ago. I hope I did right by her, he whispered into the darkness. I hope this is what you meant. The fire crackled softly. Outside an owl called, and from the bedroom came no sound at all. Clara Morgan was finally, blessedly, sleeping without fear. Elias closed his eyes and tried to do the same. He woke 3 times in the night, once when a branch scraped against the window, once when Smoke whinnied in the barn, and once when he thought he heard crying from the bedroom. But each time he listened at her door, there was only silence, and he didn't want to disturb her rest by knocking. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Elias was up before the sun, as was his habit, starting coffee and mixing biscuits from the last of his flour. He'd need to make a trip to town for supplies soon. Another thing to add to the growing list of concerns. He was just pulling the biscuits from the Dutch oven when he heard movement from the bedroom. The bar lifted, the door opened, and Clara emerged. She looked better after a night's sleep. The shadows under her eyes had faded somewhat, and there was color in her cheeks. She'd braided her auburn hair back from her face, revealing the full extent of the bruises on her temple and jaw. In the morning light, they looked worse than they had the night before, purple and yellow marks that made Elias's blood boil. Good morning, she said hesitantly. I hope I didn't oversleep. Not at all. I'm usually up before dawn. Ranching habit. There's coffee if you want it, and biscuits. They're not fancy, but they're hot. They smell wonderful. She moved to the table, accepting the cup of coffee he poured for her. She wrapped both hands around it, breathing in the steam. I can't remember the last time I had real coffee. They gave us... She paused, her expression darkening. It doesn't matter what they gave us. This is perfect. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Clara asked, "What time are you leaving for Fort Verde?" "Soon as I finish eating and get smoke saddled. It's a hard ride. I won't be back until late afternoon at the earliest. Will you be all right here alone?" She met his eyes steadily. "I survived 6 weeks with the Red Scarf Gang. I think I can manage a few hours alone in a safe house." "Fair point." He finished his biscuit and stood. "I'm leaving you my spare rifle. It's on the mantel. It's loaded, and there's extra ammunition in the top drawer of the dresser in the main room. If anyone comes and you don't recognize them, don't answer the door. If they try to force their way in, shoot first and ask questions later." "That seems extreme." "Miss Clara, after yesterday, extreme is just prudent." He strapped on his gun belt, checking the Colt revolver he'd carried since his Ranger days. "I'll be back as soon as I can. Bar the door after I leave and don't open it for anyone but me." "How will I know it's you?" "Good question." He thought for a moment. "I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. That's how my brother and I used to signal each other when we were kids sneaking out at night. Nobody else would know it. 3 times, pause, twice more. Got it." He gathered his hat and coat, then paused at the door. "Clara, about that gun. I remember. Shoot first, questions later." She tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Don't worry about me, Elias. I'm stronger than I look." "I know you are. I saw that yesterday." He opened the door, then turned back one last time. "Lock this behind me." "I will. Be safe." He stepped out into the cool morning air and didn't look back, though he wanted to. He heard the bar drop into place as he descended the steps, and only then did he allow himself to breathe easier. She'd be fine. She had to be. The ride to Fort Verde took 3 hours at a pace that had smoke blowing hard. The fort sat at the junction of the East Verde River and Beaver Creek, a collection of adobe buildings that housed 2 companies of cavalry and served as one of the few outposts of federal authority in the territory. Elias knew the commander, Captain George Randall, from his Ranger days. Randall was a career soldier, a West Point man who'd fought at Antietam and had the scars to prove it. More importantly, he was honest, a rarity in the territory where money could buy almost any man's loyalty. The captain's office was in the largest building on the parade ground. Elias found him bent over maps, planning patrol routes with his lieutenant. "Captain Randall?" The captain looked up, and recognition flickered across his weathered face. "Elias Boone. Haven't seen you in near 2 years. Heard about Margaret. I'm sorry." "Thank you, sir." Elias removed his hat. "I need your help, official help." Randall dismissed his lieutenant with a wave and gestured to a chair. "Talk to me." Elias told him everything: the auction in Silver Creek, the Red Scarf Gang's operation, Wallace's involvement, Clara's story. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, letting the facts stand for themselves. When he finished, Randall was quiet for a long moment, his expression grim. "I've heard rumors about Silver Creek," he finally said. "Nothing concrete, nothing I could act on without starting a war with the territorial government. Wallace has friends in high places." "Higher than Washington?" "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you send a telegram to the marshal's office in Tucson, another to the governor, and a third to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, since some of those wagon trains have been carrying goods meant for the reservations. Let them sort out who has jurisdiction. But someone needs to know what's happening in Silver Creek before more people die." Randall leaned back in his chair, studying Elias. "You know, if I do this, Wallace will know it came from you. He'll retaliate." "He's going to retaliate anyway. I might as well make it count." "And the girl? Miss Morgan?" "She stays at my ranch until her aunt in San Francisco can send for her. Unless—" Elias paused, something occurring to him. "Unless you have a better suggestion?" "I could arrange protection here at the fort. We have quarters for civilian women, officers' wives, laundresses. She'd be safe." Elias considered it. Logic said yes, the fort was infinitely more secure than his ranch. But something in his gut resisted the idea of sending Clara away, of not being there to ensure her safety himself. "Let me ask her," he finally said. It should be her choice. Randall nodded. Fair enough. I'll send those telegrams today. But Boone, watch your back. Wallace isn't the type to forgive, and if he's in business with the Red Scarf Gang, he's more dangerous than you realize. I know exactly how dangerous he is, Captain. That's why I'm here. They shook hands, and Elias left feeling like he'd accomplished something, even if he wasn't sure what exactly. The telegrams would go out, wheels would turn, and eventually someone with authority would have to do something about Silver Creek, but eventually might be too late for Clara and him. He stopped at the Fort Sutler's store on his way out, using some of his remaining money to buy flour, sugar, coffee, and salt pork. His supplies were running low, and God knew how long Clara might need to stay at the ranch before arrangements could be made. The clerk, a nervous man named Perkins, gave him a strange look as he tallied the purchases. Heard you made quite a scene in Silver Creek yesterday, Mr. Boone. News traveled fast in the territory. Did you now? Folks are saying you bid $500 on a woman at auction, that you faced down Jeb Wallace himself. Folks talk too much. Maybe. Perkins leaned forward, his voice dropping. But if even half what they're saying is true, you best be careful. Wallace has a long memory and a short temper. I'll keep that in mind. Elias paid for his supplies and loaded them into his saddlebags. As he led Smoke out of the fort, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He pushed Smoke hard on the way back, suddenly anxious to return to the ranch, to make sure Clara was safe. The sun was past its zenith when he finally caught sight of the valley, the cottonwoods visible as dark smudges against the brown landscape. Something was wrong. He couldn't say exactly what. Maybe it was the way the chickens weren't moving around their coop, or the stillness that seemed unnatural for mid-afternoon. But every instinct honed by years in hard country was screaming at him to be careful. He approached the house slowly, his hand resting on his revolver. As he got closer, he saw that the front door was standing open. His heart clenched. Clara knew better than that. She wouldn't leave the door open unless... Clara! He vaulted from Smoke's back and took the porch steps 2 at a time, bursting through the door with his gun drawn. The main room was empty but showed signs of a struggle. The table was overturned, broken crockery littered the floor. And on the wall, written in what looked like charcoal, was a message. Wallace always gets what he wants. Clara! Elias shouted again, racing to the bedroom. Empty. The bed was made, her borrowed clothes still hanging on pegs, but she was gone. He searched the barn, the root cellar, the corral. Nothing. No sign of her anywhere, but in the dirt by the porch, he found fresh hoofprints. 3 horses, heading northwest, toward the Superstition Mountains, toward the Red Scarf Gang's base camp. Elias stood in the yard, rage and fear warring in his chest. They'd taken her. While he was gone doing the right thing, trying to get help, they'd come and taken her back. He thought of her face last night, the way she'd smiled when he'd told her she was safe, the trust in her eyes when she'd said goodnight. He'd failed her. No, he hadn't failed her yet. She was alive. They'd taken her, which meant she was alive, and while there was breath in his body, he'd get her back. He reloaded his revolver, checked his rifle, and grabbed extra ammunition from the house. He filled his canteen, shoved jerky and hardtack into his saddlebags. He was moving on pure instinct now, not thinking, just preparing. 3 horses, at least 3 men, maybe more. He didn't care if there were 30. As the sun began its descent toward evening, Elias Boone mounted Smoke and turned the big buckskin's head toward the dark mass of the Superstition Mountains rising against the horizon. He didn't have a plan beyond finding Clara and bringing her home. He didn't need one. "Let's go, boy," he said softly to his horse. "We've got an angel to save." Smoke's hooves ate up the ground, carrying them into the lengthening shadows, toward whatever waited in those haunted mountains. Behind them, the Double B Ranch sat quiet in the valley, the door still standing open like a wound. But Elias didn't look back. His eyes were fixed forward, on the mountains, on Clara, on the men who thought they could take what wasn't theirs and face no consequences. They were about to learn different. The Superstition Mountains rose like broken teeth against the darkening sky, their jagged peaks catching the last rays of sunlight and throwing everything below into deep shadow. Elias pushed Smoke harder than he should have, but the horse seemed to understand the urgency, his powerful legs eating up the miles between the ranch and those forbidding slopes. The hoofprints were easy to follow at first, 3 horses moving fast, not bothering to hide their trail. They were confident, arrogant even, certain that no one would dare follow them into Red Scarf territory. That arrogance would be their downfall. As darkness fell, Elias was forced to slow down, relying more on instinct than sight to follow the trail. The moon rose late, a thin crescent that provided barely enough light to keep moving. He knew these foothills, had hunted deer and elk through them in better times, but the deeper canyons of the superstitions were unfamiliar territory, a maze of rock and shadow where men could disappear forever. Around midnight he found their first camp. The ashes were still warm, and Smoke's nostrils flared at the scent of other horses. They'd stopped here, probably to rest and water their mounts. Elias dismounted and studied the ground by the dying firelight, reading the story written in disturbed dirt and broken branches. 3 men, as he'd thought. And Clara. He found the impression of smaller boots, the marks where she'd sat heavily as if pushed, and something that made his blood run cold, dark spots on a rock that could only be blood. He touched one spot, felt it still slightly damp, and forced himself to breathe through the rage. She was hurt, but she was alive. They wouldn't have bothered bringing her all this way just to kill her. Wallace wanted her back for a reason, and that reason would keep her breathing until Elias could reach her. He remounted and pushed on, following the trail as it climbed higher into the mountains. The path grew treacherous, winding through narrow defiles where one misstep would send horse and rider tumbling down rocky slopes. Smoke picked his way carefully, trusting Elias's guidance even when the way seemed impossible. Dawn found them high in the mountains, and with the light came a discovery, smoke rising from a canyon about 2 miles ahead. Not the thin smoke of a campfire, but the heavier smoke of a permanent camp, multiple fires burning. The Red Scarf Gang's base. Elias found a protected spot among the rocks where Smoke could rest and graze on the sparse grass that grew in the shadows. He loosened the cinch, gave the horse water from his hat, and spent a few minutes rubbing down his legs. They'd covered nearly 40 miles in less than a day, and Smoke had given everything he had. "You did good, boy," Elias murmured, scratching the horse's favorite spot behind his ears. "Now you rest. I'll be back." He checked his weapons one more time, revolver loaded, rifle ready, knife sharp. Then he began the careful descent toward the canyon, moving from rock to rock, using every bit of cover the rough terrain provided. As he got closer, he could hear voices, the rough laughter of men who felt safe in their stronghold. The canyon opened into a natural amphitheater, protected on 3 sides by sheer rock walls that would be nearly impossible to scale. A small creek ran through the center, providing water, and scattered across the canyon floor were a dozen rough shelters, lean-tos and tents that spoke of semi-permanent occupation. Elias counted at least 15 men moving around the camp, maybe more in the shelters. The odds were suicide, but he hadn't come this far to turn back now. He needed a plan. Charging in with guns blazing would get Clara killed and accomplish nothing. He had to be smart, had to find her first, assess the situation, look for an opportunity. The sun climbed higher, heat radiating off the rocks around him. Elias waited, watched, and learned the rhythm of the camp. Men came and went from the shelters, guards changed position around the perimeter, and gradually he began to identify the leadership structure. There were the common thugs, the muscle who did what they were told. Then there were the lieutenants, harder men who carried themselves with authority. And finally, in the largest tent at the back of the canyon, the leader. He saw him emerge around mid-morning, a tall man with a red bandana tied around his neck, dark hair shot through with gray, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd killed often and slept well afterward. But Elias didn't see Clara. He spent the next 2 hours searching every angle he could find, studying every shelter, watching every movement. Finally, his patience was rewarded. 2 men emerged from a small tent near the creek, and between them, roughly dragging her forward, was Clara. Even from a distance, Elias could see the new bruises on her face, the way she favored her left side, the defiance still burning in her eyes despite everything. They tied her hands again, and one of the men held a rope attached to her bound wrists like she was a dog on a leash. The leader emerged from his tent and approached. Elias couldn't hear the words, but he could read the body language. Clara stood straight despite her obvious pain, her chin lifted, refusing to cower. The leader circled her like a predator examining prey, then grabbed her face roughly, forcing her to look at him. She spat at him. The crack of his hand across her face echoed up to where Elias crouched, and he had to physically restrain himself from charging down there immediately. The leader said something that made his men laugh, then shoved Clara toward the creek. She stumbled, but didn't fall, and when one of the guards reached to steady her mockingly, she jerked away from his touch. "That's my girl," Elias thought with fierce pride. "Don't let them break you." They took her to a large post that had been driven into the ground near the creek, probably used for tethering horses, and tied her to it, leaving her in the full sun. It was a deliberate cruelty, exposing her to the brutal Arizona heat without shelter or water. The leader spoke to his guards, pointing at Clara and then at the canyon entrance. The message was clear. They were using her as bait, expecting someone to come for her, expecting Elias. Good. Let them expect it. He just had to make sure they didn't expect how or when. He spent the rest of the day observing, memorizing patrol patterns, counting men and weapons, looking for weaknesses. The camp had only one entrance, the canyon mouth, but the walls, while steep, weren't completely unscalable. There was a section on the eastern side where rockfall had created a kind of rough staircase. Difficult, dangerous, but possible. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon in shades of orange and gold, Elias made his decision. He'd wait until full dark, after midnight when men's attention waned and their guard dropped. He'd come down the eastern wall, cross to where Clara was tied, cut her loose, and they'd slip out the way he'd come in. It wasn't a great plan. There were 100 ways it could go wrong, but it was the only plan he had. He worked his way back to where he'd left Smoke, moving carefully to avoid dislodging rocks that might alert the guards below. The horse greeted him with a soft nicker, and Elias spent a few minutes checking his gear and eating some of the jerky from his saddlebag. His stomach was tight with tension, but he forced himself to eat anyway. He'd need his strength for what was coming. As darkness fell, he allowed himself to think about Clara, about the fear she must be feeling tied to that post, wondering if anyone would come, if Elias had abandoned her. He hoped she'd trust him enough to know he wouldn't, that he'd move heaven and earth to get her back. "I'm coming," he whispered into the darkness, as if somehow the words could reach her across the distance. "Hold on a little longer." The moon rose, slightly fuller than the night before, providing just enough light to see by. Elias waited, watching the stars wheel overhead, counting the hours until the camp below would be at its quietest. Around 2 a.m, he saw the last lamp extinguished in the leader's tent, heard the guards change for what he'd observed was the final time before dawn. Time to move. He approached the eastern wall and began his descent, testing each handhold before committing his weight, moving with agonizing slowness. One loose rock, one careless sound, and it would all be over. The rough stone cut his hands, and he could feel blood making his grip slippery, but he kept moving, down and down, until finally his boots touched the canyon floor. He froze, listening. Snoring came from several of the shelters, and one of the guards was humming tunelessly to himself near the canyon entrance. The creek burbled over stones, and somewhere an owl called. Normal sounds? No alarm. Elias drew his knife and began working his way toward where Clara was tied. The post was about 50 yards from his position, visible as a dark shape against the slightly lighter sky. He moved from shadow to shadow, using every bit of cover, barely breathing. He was 20 yards away when Clara lifted her head. She'd been slumped against the post, and for a heart-stopping moment, he'd thought she was unconscious, or worse. But she straightened, and even in the darkness, he could see her eyes widen as she spotted him. She opened her mouth, to warn him or call out. He wasn't sure, but he pressed a finger to his lips in the universal gesture for silence. She nodded, understanding, and he saw relief flood her features even as tears began to slip down her cheeks. 10 yards. 5. He was almost there when a voice shattered the silence. "I was wondering when you'd show up, Mr. Boone." Elias spun, bringing his knife up, but it was too late. Lamps blazed to life all around the canyon, and suddenly he could see at least a dozen men emerging from the shadows, all of them armed, all of them pointed at him. The leader stepped forward, his red bandana vivid in the lamplight, a smile playing across his scarred face. "You're predictable. Wallace said you'd come alone. Said you were the hero type who couldn't resist playing savior. He was right." Elias didn't lower his knife. "Let her go. Your quarrel is with me." "Oh, I have no quarrel with you at all, Mr. Boone. You're just an obstacle to be removed. But the girl—" The leader walked toward Clara, running a finger down her cheek while she glared at him with undisguised hatred. "The girl is worth a lot of money. Wallace paid us handsomely to bring her back, but I'm thinking maybe we can get more by selling her to someone else. Start a bidding war, as it were. You'll have to go through me first. I was counting on that." The leader gestured, and two of his men moved forward, their guns trained on Elias. "Drop the knife. Drop it, or I'll have my men shoot you where you stand, and then I'll let every man in this camp have a turn with your precious angel before we sell her. Your choice." Elias looked at Clara. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she shook her head slightly, a tiny movement that said, "Don't do it. Don't surrender." But he couldn't watch her be hurt, couldn't let these animals touch her. He slowly lowered his knife, letting it fall to the dirt. "Good choice." The leader nodded, and the two men grabbed Elias, forcing his arms behind his back and binding his wrists with rough rope. "Bring him over here. I want him to watch." They dragged Elias to the post and forced him to his knees next to Clara. Up close, he could see the full extent of what they'd done to her. Her lip was split and swollen. Her left eye was starting to purple, and she had rope burns on her wrist that looked infected. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," she whispered back, her voice fierce despite her condition. "You came. That's more than anyone else would have done." How touching. The leader crouched down in front of them, his eyes cold and dead. A romance born at an auction. "Wallace will be pleased to know true love still exists, right before I crush it out of existence." "Wallace is using you," Elias said, trying to buy time, trying to think of some way out of this. "He'll turn on you the moment it's convenient. Men like him always do." "Perhaps, but right now he's paying well, and that's all that matters." The leader stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "Tie him to the post with her. At dawn, we'll send a message to Wallace, see if he wants to come collect them both, or if I should just kill the cowboy and keep the girl. Either way, it'll be entertaining." The guards untied Clara from the post and retied both of them together, back to back against the thick wood. The ropes were tight enough to cut into Elias's skin, and he felt Clara gasp as they cinched them brutally tight. "Try to sleep," the leader mocked. "You've got a few hours until dawn, and then the real fun begins." He walked away, taking most of the men with him. Two guards remained, sitting by a nearby fire, their rifles across their laps. They didn't look particularly alert. Clearly they didn't consider two bound prisoners much of a threat, but they were there, watchful enough. "Are you hurt badly?" Elias asked Clara quietly, keeping his voice low enough that the guards wouldn't hear. "I'll live. My ribs are bruised, maybe cracked, and I think I pulled something in my shoulder, but nothing's broken." She paused. They didn't do what you're thinking. Wallace gave orders that I was to be kept intact for him. It's the only thing that saved me." Relief flooded through him. "Thank God." "Don't thank him yet. We're not exactly in a good position." "I know. I'm working on it." "Working on what?" "We're tied to a post with armed guards and surrounded by at least 15 armed men. Even if we could get free, where would we go? How would we escape?" "I don't know yet," Elias admitted, "but I'll figure something out." "You're insane." That's been suggested before. Despite everything, he heard Clara laugh, a small, breathless sound that spoke of hysteria held barely in check. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked. "What?" "For one day, one single day, I felt safe. I slept without nightmares. I woke up in a real bed in a real house with a good man protecting me. One day of peace after weeks of hell. And now it's gone, and I don't think I can survive going through this again. I just don't think I'm strong enough." "You are." Elias wished he could turn around, wished he could see her face, hold her. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Clara Morgan. You survived the initial attack, survived weeks of captivity, stood up to these animals even when they beat you. You spat in that bastard's face today. That takes more courage than most men will show in a lifetime. Courage or stupidity? Both, probably. But I'll take brave and foolish over cowardly and smart any day. She was quiet for a moment, and he felt her shoulders shake against his back. "Why did you come?" she finally asked, her voice thick with tears. "You had to know it was a trap. Why risk your life for me?" "Because leaving you here wasn't an option." "That's not an answer." He took a breath, and the words came from somewhere deep inside, a place he'd kept locked since Margaret died. "Because when I lifted that sack and saw your face, something in me woke up. Something I thought died with my wife, and I couldn't let that light go out again." Clara's breath hitched. "Elias, I know it's not proper. I know we barely know each other, and Lord knows this is the worst possible time to be saying this, but if we're going to die at dawn, I wanted you to know. You're not just someone I saved. You're someone I—" He struggled to find the right words. "You're someone who matters." The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things they couldn't say, all the possibilities that would never be if the sun rose and found them still bound to this post. Then Clara spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I don't want to die." "You won't. I promise you won't." "You can't promise that. Watch me." He started working his wrists against the rope, ignoring the pain as it dug into his skin, searching for any give, any weakness. The rope was hemp, thick and strong, but all rope had weaknesses. He just had to find it. Hours passed. The guards by the fire dozed, their vigilance waning as the night deepened. Elias kept working the rope, feeling it gradually begin to loosen as his blood made it slippery. Behind him, Clara had grown quiet, her breathing shallow and pained. "Talk to me," he said softly. "Tell me about Boston. Tell me about your life before." "Why?" "Because I want to know. Because if we get out of this, when we get out of this, I want to know everything about you." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she began to speak, her voice distant, remembering. "Our house was on Beacon Hill, narrow and tall, with a blue door my mother loved. She died when I was 8, cholera, and after that it was just Father and me. He was brilliant, everyone said so, but he never cared about money or status. He cared about healing people, especially the ones who couldn't pay." Sounds like a good man. "He was the best man. He used to take me on his rounds, let me help him mix medications, taught me to read medical texts when other girls my age were learning embroidery. He said I had a gift for healing, that I could see what others missed. I wanted to be like him, wanted to help people the way he did. You still can. Not from here, not tied to a post waiting to be sold like cattle." "Yes, even from here." Elias felt the rope give a little more. "You survived, Clara. You're still fighting. That matters. That's healing yourself, and that's the first step. Are you always this optimistic in the face of certain death?" "I prefer to think of it as determined rather than optimistic." She laughed again, and this time it sounded more genuine. "You're an odd man, Elias Boone." "So I've been told." The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, the stars fading one by one, when Elias finally felt the rope loosen enough that he could slip one hand free. The skin was raw and bleeding, but his hand was free. He waited, barely breathing, but the guards didn't notice. They were both asleep now, their rifles slipping from their laps. Working quickly and quietly, Elias untied the rest of the rope binding them to the post, then reached around to start on Clara's bonds. "When I get you free," he whispered, "we're going to move very slowly and very quietly toward the eastern wall. Can you climb?" "I don't know. My ribs." "You'll climb. You have to. It's the only way out." He got her hands free, then helped her work the circulation back into her fingers. She bit back a gasp as the blood flow returned, tears streaming down her face from the pain. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded, and together they rose, moving like ancient people, every muscle screaming protest. The guards continued to sleep, and the rest of the camp was silent. Dawn was perhaps 20 minutes away. They had to move now. They'd taken 3 steps toward the wall when a shout split the air. "They're loose! They're loose!" One of the guards had woken up, was scrambling for his rifle. Elias didn't think, didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbed the rifle before the guard could bring it to bear, and slammed the stock into the man's face. The guard went down, blood streaming from his broken nose. The second guard was awake now, raising his weapon, but Clara grabbed a rock and hurled it with surprising accuracy, catching him in the temple. He staggered, and Elias was on him, wrestling the rifle away and using it to knock him unconscious. But it was too late. The camp was erupting, men pouring from shelters, grabbing weapons. The leader emerged from his tent, his face twisted with rage. "Don't let them reach the wall! Kill the man! Take the woman alive!" Gunfire exploded in the confines of the canyon, bullets whining off rocks and kicking up dirt. Elias grabbed Clara's hand and ran, half dragging her toward the eastern wall as chaos erupted behind them. He fired the captured rifle one-handed, not aiming, just providing covering fire. They reached the base of the wall, and Elias shoved Clara toward the first handhold. "Climb! Don't look back! Don't stop! Just climb!" "What about you?" "I'm right behind you. Now go!" She climbed, moving faster than he'd thought possible for someone with cracked ribs and rope-burned wrists. Elias fired the last rounds from the rifle, threw it aside, and started climbing after her. A bullet struck the rock next to his head, showering him with stone fragments. Another ricocheted off the wall above. The gang was recovering from their surprise, organizing, and any second now they'd realize they could just shoot the climbers off the wall like fish in a barrel. "Faster!" Elias shouted. Clara was 20 feet up now, 30, her hands bleeding from the rough stone but still moving. Elias climbed below her, trying to shield her with his body, knowing it was futile but doing it anyway. Then he heard it, the thunder of hooves growing louder, echoing off the canyon walls. For a confused moment, he thought it was more of the gang arriving, but then he heard something that made his heart leap. A bugle call. The cavalry call to charge. Captain Randall's voice boomed across the canyon. "United States Army! Drop your weapons and surrender!" The gang members spun, caught between the climbers and the sudden arrival of 2 companies of cavalry pouring through the canyon entrance. Confusion reigned, men running in all directions, some trying to fight, others trying to flee. "Keep climbing!" Elias shouted to Clara. "Don't stop!" They climbed until their hands were numb, until their muscles screamed, until finally they crested the top of the wall and collapsed on the relatively flat ground beyond. Below them, the battle was brief and brutal. The gang, caught by surprise and surrounded, surrendered quickly. Only the leader tried to make a stand, and Elias watched as 3 troopers brought him down, binding him with the same ropes he'd used on so many others. Captain Randall looked up, saw Elias and Clara on the cliff edge, and saluted. Elias returned the salute, then turned to Clara. She was lying on her back, staring at the sky, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. Her hands were bleeding, her face was bruised, her dress was torn, but she was alive. "We made it," she whispered. "We actually made it." Elias collapsed beside her, every muscle in his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. "Told you I'd figure something out." She turned her head to look at him, and despite everything, the pain, the fear, the ordeal they'd just survived, she smiled. "You're completely insane." "Yeah," he agreed. "But you're safe. That's all that matters." She reached over and took his bloody hand in her bloody hand, threading their fingers together. They lay there as the sun rose over the Superstition Mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, while below them the cavalry rounded up the last of the Red Scarf Gang, and justice finally came to the Arizona Territory. Neither of them spoke. Words seemed inadequate for what they'd survived, for what they'd shared, for what was beginning to grow between them. So they just held hands and watched the sunrise. 2 people who'd been through hell and somehow found their way back to the light. Together, Captain Randall's men reached them within the hour, helping them down from the cliff edge and providing water, food, and medical attention. The post surgeon, a gruff man named Henderson who'd seen too many battlefield injuries to be shocked by anything, examined Clara first despite her protest that Elias needed attention. "Your ribs are cracked, not broken," Henderson announced after a careful examination that made Clara wince with every touch. "You've got rope burns that need cleaning before they get infected, and these bruises will hurt like the devil for a week or 2, but you'll heal. You're lucky, miss." "Lucky," Clara repeated flatly, and Elias saw something dark flash across her face. Yes, I suppose compared to being dead, I'm very lucky. Henderson caught the bitterness in her voice and softened his tone. I've been an army surgeon for 20 years, miss. I've seen what men like that gang do to their captives. The fact that you're sitting here, alive and whole, talking back to me with fire in your eyes, that's not just luck. That's survival. That's strength. Don't diminish it. Claire's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, unable to speak. Henderson patted her shoulder awkwardly, then turned his attention to Elias, prodding his rope-burned wrists and checking for other injuries with efficient hands. You'll do, he finally pronounced. Clean these wounds twice a day, keep them wrapped, and try not to do anything stupid for at least a week. Though from what the captain tells me, that last bit might be beyond your capabilities. Despite everything, Elias smiled. I'll do my best, Doc. Down in the canyon, the cavalry had secured all 15 members of the Red Scarf Gang, including their leader, whose name Elias learned was Samuel Creed. They'd found evidence of dozens of raids, stolen goods, personal effects from victims, and a ledger detailing every wagon train they'd hit and every person they'd sold over the past 3 years. The numbers made Elias sick to his stomach. Captain Randall climbed up to where they sat, his weathered face grim with satisfaction. We got them all, he reported. Every last one of them, and enough evidence to hang them twice over. The territorial judge will have a field day with this. What about Wallace? Elias asked. He was behind this, pulling the strings. We found correspondence between him and Creed in the leader's tent. Letters detailing payments, information about wagon trains, orders for specific types of captives. Wallace's signature is on at least a dozen of them. Randall's expression was hard. I sent a detachment to Silver Creek an hour ago to arrest him. He won't slip away this time. Clara looked up, hope and disbelief warring in her eyes. You really think he'll face justice? Men like Wallace always seem to escape. Not this time, Randall said firmly. We've got federal charges now, interfering with military supply lines, since some of those wagon trains were carrying goods for the Apache reservations. That means a federal judge, a federal trial, and no amount of bribed local officials will help him. He's done. The words seemed to break something in Clara. She'd been holding herself together through sheer will, but now, with safety finally real and justice actually possible, the dam burst. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Elias moved without thinking, pulling her against his chest despite the pain in his own injuries, one hand cradling the back of her head while she cried into his shirt. He didn't try to shush her or tell her everything was fine. He just held her and let her release the terror and grief she'd been carrying for so long. Captain Randall discreetly withdrew, taking his men with him, giving them a moment of privacy in the midst of the chaos. I'm sorry, Clara finally managed, her voice muffled against Elias's chest. I'm sorry. I don't usually fall apart like this. You don't have to apologize for being human, Elias said quietly. You've been through more than most people could survive. You're allowed to feel it. I thought we were going to die. When they had us tied to that post when the sun was coming up, I really believed that was the end. And all I could think about was how unfair it was that I just found someone good, someone who saw me as more than property or a burden, and I was going to lose him before I even really had him. Elias's heart clenched. He pulled back slightly so he could see her face, using his thumb to wipe away her tears. You haven't lost me. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. But what happens now? Where do I go? My aunt in San Francisco probably thinks I'm dead by now. I have no money, no possessions except borrowed clothes, nothing. You have me, Elias said simply. You have the ranch, if you want it. You have a place to heal and figure out what comes next. And you have time. Nobody's rushing you to make any decisions. She searched his face, and he let her, having nothing to hide. Why? She asked for what felt like the 100th time. Why do you keep helping me? What do you want from me? I want you to be happy, Elias said, and realized as he said it that it was the complete truth. I want you to feel safe. I want you to have the chance to become whoever you want to be, without fear or debt hanging over you. That's all. If that means you stay at the ranch, good. If it means I help you get to San Francisco, that's good too. Whatever you need, Clara, that's what I want to give you. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different, softer, less desperate. No one has ever just wanted me to be happy before. Father wanted me educated. The men at the medical college wanted me to be quiet and know my place. The gang wanted me to be profitable. And Wallace, she shuddered, Wallace wanted me to be broken. But you just want me to be me. Well, the you I've seen is pretty remarkable. Why would I want you to be anything else? She laughed through her tears, and then, moving slowly as if testing whether he'd pull away, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. They stayed like that, breathing the same air, closer than propriety allowed, but beyond caring about such things. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For saving me. For coming after me. For not giving up even when you should have. Thank you. You already thanked me several times. I'll probably keep thanking you for the rest of my life. Get used to it." The words hung in the air between them, rest of my life, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. But they didn't pull apart either, staying close, taking comfort in each other's presence while the cavalry dismantled the Red Scarf Gang's camp below. Eventually, Captain Randall returned, clearing his throat diplomatically to announce his presence before he got too close. "We're ready to head back to the fort, if you're able to travel. We've got wagons for the wounded and prisoners, and I've arranged for proper quarters for Miss Morgan. She'll have privacy and medical care until other arrangements can be made." Clara stiffened slightly in Elias's arms, and he felt her reluctance even before she spoke. "If it's all the same, Captain, I'd prefer to return to Elias's ranch, if he'll still have me." Randall looked between them, his expression knowing. "That wouldn't be entirely proper, Miss Morgan. Without a chaperone or to—" "With respect, Captain," Clara interrupted, and Elias heard steel in her voice. "I've been beaten, starved, sold at auction, kidnapped, and tied to a post to die. I think propriety is the least of my concerns right now. Elias's ranch is the only place I've felt safe in months, and that's where I want to be." Randall raised his hands in surrender. "Fair enough. I can't say I blame you. But there will be talk, you understand. Small territory, smaller minds." "Let them talk," Elias said firmly. "We know the truth, and that's what matters." "Besides," Clara added with a trace of dark humor, "after everything that's happened, being ruined by association with a good man seems almost quaint." The captain smiled despite himself. "You're a formidable woman, Miss Morgan. Boone, you've got your hands full with this one." "I'm counting on it," Elias replied. They rode back to Fort Verde in one of the wagons, Clara dozing against Elias's shoulder, while he watched the Superstition Mountains recede behind them. The gang members rode in a separate wagon, heavily guarded and shackled. Samuel Creed stared at Elias as they passed, his eyes promising revenge even in defeat, but Elias stared back until Creed looked away. Some men never learned that violence had consequences, but he was about to get an education at the end of a rope. At the fort, Captain Randall provided them with supplies, fresh horses since Smoke needed rest after their ordeal, and an armed escort for the journey back to the Double B Ranch. "Just a precaution," he explained. "Wallace might not come himself, but he's got money and men who are loyal to money. Until he's actually in custody, I want you protected." The escort consisted of 4 troopers, young but competent, who kept a respectful distance as they rode. The journey took most of the day, and by the time they arrived at the ranch, the sun was setting and Clara was swaying in the saddle with exhaustion. Elias helped her down, and she looked at the small adobe house with something like longing. "I never thought I'd see this place again," she said quietly. "When they took me, I thought—" "Don't," Elias interrupted gently. "Don't think about what might have been. You're here. You're home." "Home," she repeated, testing the word. "It's been so long since I had a place I could call that." The troopers helped them unload supplies, checked the perimeter of the ranch to ensure no unwelcome visitors had arrived, and then prepared to camp for the night in the barn. "We'll stay until the captain sends word that Wallace is in custody," their sergeant explained. "Orders are not to leave you unprotected." That night, Elias made stew from the salt pork and vegetables the fort had provided, and they ate at the small table while the lamp cast warm light across the room. Clara was quiet, moving food around her plate more than eating it, and Elias could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. "You should sleep," he said. "Bedroom's still yours. I changed the sheets while the troopers were settling in." "I don't want to be alone," she admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that camp, tied to that post. I keep thinking I'll wake up and discover this was just a dream, that I'm still there waiting to die. Then I'll sit with you, like before. Door open, chair in the doorway, and I'll stay until you fall asleep." She nodded gratefully, and they went through the same ritual as that first night. Her changing into borrowed night clothes, him positioning the chair, both of them trying to find some semblance of normalcy in circumstances that were anything but normal. But this time, when she climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, she looked at him with an expression that made his heart ache. "Would you think less of me if I asked you to stay closer? Not anything improper, just close enough that I know you're really here?" Elias stood up from the chair and moved to sit on the floor beside the bed, his back against the wall, close enough that she could reach down and touch his shoulder if she needed to. "How's this? Better?" She let her hand rest on his shoulder, and he covered it with his own. "Tell me something good. Tell me about your life before everything went wrong. Tell me about Margaret." He was quiet for a moment, and then he began to talk. He told her about meeting Margaret at a barn dance when they were both 17, how she'd laughed at his terrible dancing and offered to teach him. He told her about their wedding under the cottonwood tree, about building the ranch together, about the dreams they'd had of filling the house with children and growing old watching the seasons change. "She would have liked you," he said. "She always said she could tell a person's character by how they treated animals and children. You would have passed her test with flying colors." "How do you know? You've never seen me with either." "I've seen how you treat yourself. You fight even when fighting seems hopeless. You protect your dignity even when everyone else has tried to strip it away. You survive." Margaret would have recognized a kindred spirit. Clara was quiet for so long that Elias thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she said softly, "Do you think you could ever love someone again? After losing her?" The question should have hurt, but somehow it didn't. "I didn't think so," Elias admitted. "For 2 years I was sure my heart died with her. But then I lifted a burlap sack and saw an angel, and I realized maybe the heart can surprise you. Maybe love isn't a single well that runs dry, but a spring that keeps flowing if you let it." That's very poetic for a rancher. Margaret liked poetry. Some of it must have rubbed off. Her hand tightened on his shoulder. "I'm scared, Elias. I'm scared of feeling too much, of trusting too much, of letting myself hope for something good only to have it ripped away again." That's not fear, that's wisdom. Anyone who's been through what you've been through would be a fool not to be careful. But being careful doesn't mean giving up on hope entirely. Is that what you're offering me? Hope? I'm offering you safety, time, and a chance to figure out what you want your life to be. If hope comes along for the ride, then that's just a bonus. She slid her hand down to thread her fingers through his, and they sat like that. Her in bed, him on the floor, hands joined, while the night deepened outside and the sounds of the ranch settled into peaceful silence. "Elias?" Her voice was drowsy now, sleep finally claiming her. "Yes?" "When this is all over, when Wallace is in prison and the gang is dealt with, when I've had time to heal and think and breathe, ask me to stay, properly. Ask me to stay not because I have nowhere else to go, but because you want me here." His throat was tight. "And if I ask, what will you say?" But she was already asleep, her breathing deep and even, her hand still clasped in his. Elias sat on the floor beside her bed until dawn light crept through the window, keeping watch over her dreams and letting himself imagine a future where the answer to his question might be yes. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo of waiting. The troopers maintained their watch, though nothing disturbed the peace of the valley. Clara spent much of her time resting, letting her body heal from the ordeal, though Elias noticed she was never far from the windows, always watching, always waiting for trouble that might come. On the 4th day, a rider arrived from Fort Verde. Captain Randall himself, his expression grim but satisfied. "Wallace is in custody," he announced without preamble. "Federal marshals arrested him yesterday morning. He tried to run, had a bag packed with money and false identity papers, but they caught him at the stage depot. He's in the territorial prison in Yuma now, awaiting trial." Elias felt Clara sag with relief beside him. "It's really over?" "The immediate danger is over," Randall confirmed. Wallace won't be bothering anyone from prison, and the Red Scarf Gang is finished. We've also located the families of many of the victims and are working on reuniting survivors with their relatives where possible. What about the little girls? Clara asked urgently. The two sisters who were sold before me? Randall's expression softened. We found them. They'd been sold to a couple in Tucson who claimed they were orphans they'd adopted. The law is sorting out the details, but they're safe now and will be returned to their remaining family in Missouri. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Thank God! I've been so worried about them. You should also know that your aunt in San Francisco has been contacted. We sent a telegram explaining the situation, and she sent money for your passage on the next stage west. She'll be expecting you within the month. The word should have brought relief, but Elias felt his heart sink. Of course Clara would go to California. She had family there, a chance at a new life far from the trauma of the territory. It was the right thing, the smart thing, but it meant losing her, and he was surprised by how much that prospect hurt. Clara was quiet, her expression unreadable. She sent money? Quite a bit, actually. Enough for comfortable travel and new clothes and whatever else you might need to start fresh. She seems like a generous woman. She is. She and my mother were very close. Clara looked at Elias, and something passed between them. A question, a possibility, a choice, unmade. Thank you for letting her know I'm alive, Captain. That was kind of you. It's the least we could do, Miss Morgan. You've been through enough without your family thinking you were dead. Randall cleared his throat. There is one other matter. The territorial judge has requested that you testify at Wallace's trial. Your testimony, combined with the physical evidence and the gang members who are willing to talk in exchange for lighter sentences, should be enough to put Wallace away for life. Clara's face paled. I have to see him again? Not if you don't want to. Your written testimony would be sufficient. But the judge felt I should ask. Having you there in person would make a stronger case. When would the trial be? Not for at least 2 months? These things take time, especially with federal charges involved. You'd have plenty of time to recover and prepare. Clara looked at Elias again, and he saw the question in her eyes. He gave a slight nod. Your choice. Whatever you decide. I'll testify, she said firmly. If it means Wallace faces the full consequences of what he's done, I'll face him again. I won't let fear of him control my life anymore. Randall smiled with approval. You're a brave woman, Miss Morgan. The territory needs more people with your backbone. After the captain left, taking his troopers with him, since the immediate danger had passed, Elias and Clara stood on the porch, watching the dust settle from the departing horses. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words. So, Elias finally said, California. My aunt sent money. She did. It would be the sensible thing. Start fresh where nobody knows what happened to me, where I could forget all of this and build a new life. It would be very sensible. Clara turned to face him, and he saw something fierce and determined in her eyes. When have I ever been sensible, Elias Boone? Sensible women don't spit in gang leaders' faces. Sensible women don't climb cliffs with cracked ribs. And sensible women definitely don't fall in love with stubborn ranchers who risk everything to save complete strangers. His heart stopped. Clara, you said to ask you to stay properly when this was all over. Well, I'm asking you first. Ask me to stay. Not because I need saving or shelter, but because you want me here. Because you feel what I feel. Ask me, Elias. He stepped closer, taking both her hands in his, not caring that his palms were still bandaged, not caring about propriety or what people would say. Clara Morgan, will you stay? Will you make this house a home again? Will you let me spend every day proving that good things can still happen, that love isn't just something that exists in the past? Yes, she whispered, and then louder, with certainty. Yes, I'll stay. I'll stay and build a life here with you, and I'll testify at that trial, and I'll write to my aunt and thank her for the money, but tell her I found where I belong. He kissed her then, gentle because of her split lip, tender because of everything she'd survived, and full of promise for everything they could build together. She kissed him back, her arms winding around his neck, and for the first time since Margaret's death, Elias felt the future open up before him as something to anticipate rather than simply endure. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Clara smiled up at him with that remarkable light in her green eyes. So, what happens now? How does this work? Well, first I'm going to ride to town tomorrow and talk to Reverend Mitchell about posting bans. We'll do this properly. 3 weeks' notice, a real wedding, invite the whole territory if that's what you want. I don't need the whole territory, just you, me, and that cottonwood tree you mentioned, the one where you married Margaret. He pulled back slightly. You're sure? That tree has memories, and now it will have new ones. Good memories. That's not erasing the past, Elias. That's honoring it by building a future. Margaret would understand that. I think she'd approve. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her undamaged lip. You're extraordinary, you know that? I'm practical. There's a difference. But she was smiling, and it lit up her whole face. Now, what else needs to happen? Well, you mentioned you have medical training. Silver Creek needs a doctor. The old one died last winter, and folks have been making do with home remedies and hope. If you wanted to set up a practice, I could help you build a clinic. Nothing fancy, but good enough to serve the people who need it. Clara's eyes widened. You do that? Help me become a doctor? You already are a doctor, or close enough. You just need a place to practice your skills. And from what I've seen, those skills are considerable. She kissed him again, fierce and grateful, and Elias thought about how strange life was, how you could lose everything and think you'd never be whole again, only to find that healing came in the most unexpected forms. They spent the rest of the day making plans, practical ones about the clinic and the wedding, and impractical ones about the children they'd have and the life they'd build. The sun set over the valley, painting everything gold and rose, and inside the small adobe house, two people who'd survived the worst the world could throw at them began to dream about the best it could offer. That night, Clara slept in the bedroom and Elias by the fire, as was proper for an unmarried couple. But when nightmares woke her in the dark hours before dawn, she called out and he came running, and he held her while she cried and talked through the terror until peace returned. I'm sorry, she whispered when her breathing had calmed. I know I should be stronger. You're the strongest person I know, Elias said firmly. But strength doesn't mean never needing help. It means accepting help when you need it and offering it when others do. You're going to have nightmares for a while, Clara. That's normal after what you've been through. But each night they'll fade a little more, and each morning you'll wake up a little more certain that you're safe. How do you know? Because that's how it was for me after Margaret died. The grief was unbearable at first, and then it was just bearable. And eventually it became something I could carry without it breaking me. Your trauma will do the same. It'll never disappear completely, but it'll transform into something you can live with. Something that makes you stronger rather than weaker. She nestled against him, and they sat like that until dawn broke. Not sleeping, just being together, and learning that sometimes the greatest healing comes not from forgetting the past, but from building a future strong enough to outweigh it. When the sun rose, painting the world in shades of gold and promise, Elias and Clara stood together on the porch of the Double B Ranch and watched a new day begin. Somewhere out there, Wallace sat in prison, waiting for justice. Somewhere, families were being reunited with loved ones they'd thought lost forever. And here, in a small valley watered by Willow Creek, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances began to build something beautiful from the ashes of their pain. The angel who'd been auctioned with a sack over her head had found her freedom, and the cowboy who'd lifted that sack had found his second chance at love. Together, they'd found home. 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and healing. Elias rode to Silver Creek and posted the banns with Reverend Mitchell, a kind-faced man who'd known Margaret and offered his blessing without hesitation. Word spread quickly through the territory. The rancher who'd defied Wallace was marrying the woman he'd saved, and despite the scandal some whispered about, most folks seemed pleased that something good had come from all the darkness. Clara threw herself into planning the clinic, sketching designs on scraps of paper while Elias worked on clearing the space beside the corral where it would stand. Her hands had healed, the rope burns fading to pink scars that would eventually disappear, and her ribs no longer made her wince with every breath. The bruises on her face had turned from purple to yellow to nothing, and with each passing day Elias watched her transform from a woman merely surviving to one truly living. But the nightmares persisted. Not every night, but often enough that Elias grew accustomed to waking in the small hours to her muffled cries. He'd go to her door, knock softly, and she'd let him in. He'd sit on the floor beside her bed until dawn, their hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing until the terror released its grip and she could breathe again. "I'm worried about the trial," she admitted one night, about a week before their wedding. "Captain Randall sent word that it's been scheduled for next month. I'll have to face Wallace, look him in the eye and tell everyone what happened. What if I freeze? What if I can't do it?" "Then I'll be right there with you," Elias said firmly. "In the courtroom, holding your hand if they'll let me, and waiting outside if they won't. You won't face him alone, Clara, not ever again." "What if seeing me makes him angry? What if he finds a way to—" "He's in chains behind bars with armed guards. He can't hurt you anymore. The only power he has left is the fear you give him, and every day you take more of that back. By the time you testify, he'll be nothing but a bitter man facing consequences he spent his whole life avoiding." She squeezed his hand. "How are you always so certain about everything?" "I'm not. I'm just certain about you, about us. The rest, I figure we'll handle as it comes." The morning of their wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of autumn day when the Arizona Territory showed its gentler side. The heat had broken, and the air carried a crispness that promised winter without threatening it. Elias woke before dawn, as always, but today nervous energy kept him from his usual routine. He fed the animals, checked the fence lines, and found himself back at the house with hours still to kill before the ceremony. Clara emerged from the bedroom wearing the dress Elias had commissioned for Mrs. Henderson, the seamstress in Silver Creek. It was simple, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. But on Clara it looked like something from a magazine. She'd left her auburn hair loose, the way Elias loved it, and woven small white flowers through it that she'd gathered from along the creek. "You're staring," she said, but she was smiling. "Can't help it. You're beautiful." "You're biased." "Absolutely. Doesn't make it less true." People began arriving around noon, more than Elias had expected. Captain Randall came with his wife, a cheerful woman named Caroline, who'd insisted on making a cake. Doc Henderson arrived with his medical bag, joking that he always brought it to weddings because someone usually needed stitches before the dancing was done. Families from neighboring ranches, folks from town who'd heard the story and wanted to show their support, even some of the troopers who'd helped rescue them from the gang's camp. But the most surprising arrival was a woman in her 50s who climbed down from the stage looking travel-worn and determined. She had Clara's green eyes and the same stubborn set to her jaw. "Aunt Patricia?" Clara's voice was incredulous. "What are you doing here? I wrote you that I was staying—" "I know what you wrote," Patricia Morgan said, pulling Clara into a fierce embrace. "Did you really think I'd let my only niece get married without family present? I left San Francisco the day I got your letter. Someone needs to represent your father, and I intend to give you away properly." Clara burst into tears, happy ones this time, and Elias felt his own eyes sting watching the reunion. Patricia looked over Clara's head at him, her expression assessing and sharp. "So you're the cowboy who saved my niece?" "Just did what needed doing, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me, and don't be modest. Clara's letters told me everything. You risked your life for a stranger, faced down criminals and corrupt officials, and gave her a home when she had nothing. That's not just doing what needed doing, young man. That's heroism." Elias felt his face heat. "If you say so, ma'am. I mean, Miss Morgan. Patricia. If you're marrying my niece, you'd better call me Patricia." She released Clara and stepped forward, taking Elias's measure with a long look. Finally, she nodded. "My brother would have approved. He always said character mattered more than circumstances. And you've got character, Elias Boone. Welcome to what's left of our family." The ceremony took place under the cottonwood tree at 3 o'clock, when the light was golden and the shadows long. Reverend Mitchell stood with his back to the creek, Clara and Elias facing him, while their guests gathered in a semicircle around them. Patricia stood beside Clara, one hand on her niece's shoulder, while Captain Randall stood up with Elias at his request. "Dearly beloved," Mitchell began, his voice carrying across the gathering, "we are assembled here in the sight of God, and these witnesses to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. It is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." Elias barely heard the traditional words. He was too focused on Clara's face, on the way the afternoon light caught in her hair, on the joy and peace and hope shining in her eyes. She looked at him like he'd hung the moon, and he felt the same way about her. "Elias," Mitchell said, drawing his attention back to the moment, "do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do you part?" "I do." His voice was steady, certain, carrying no doubt whatsoever. "And Clara, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" Clara's voice rang out clear and strong. "I do." They exchanged simple gold bands. Elias had ordered them from the jeweler in Silver Creek, spending the last of his savings on them. And when Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, Elias kissed her with a crowd watching and didn't care one bit about propriety or what anyone thought. The celebration that followed was boisterous and joyful. Someone had brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and music filled the valley as the sun descended toward the horizon. Clara danced with Elias, then with Captain Randall, then with every man present who asked politely enough. Elias watched her laugh and spin, watched the last shadows of trauma lift from her shoulders as joy took their place, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Patricia found Elias standing apart from the crowd, watching his new wife teach a group of children a dance she'd learned in Boston. "She's happy," Patricia observed, "truly happy. I wasn't sure I'd ever see that again after her father died. She loved him so much, and losing him nearly broke her. Then everything that happened on the journey west—" She shook her head. "I thought when I finally saw her again, I'd find a broken woman. Instead, I find someone stronger than before." "She was always strong," Elias said. "She just needed the chance to prove it to herself. And you gave her that chance. You gave her safety and time and space to heal. That's a rare gift, Elias." Patricia was quiet for a moment, then added, "My brother would have liked you. He always said the measure of a man wasn't what he did when people were watching, but what he did when no one was. You proved your measure the day you bid on a woman with a sack over her head. You didn't know what you were getting, didn't know if she'd be grateful or resentful or broken beyond repair. You just knew it was wrong, and you stopped it. That takes a special kind of courage." "Or a special kind of stubbornness," Patricia laughed. "Those two things often overlap. Clara has the same quality. She gets it honestly. The Morgan family has never been good at accepting injustice quietly. I noticed that when she spat in a gang leader's face. She told me about that. Terrifying and magnificent in equal measure, just like her mother." Patricia's expression grew serious. "There's something you should know about the trial." Elias's attention sharpened. "What about it?" "Wallace's lawyers have been making noise about Clara's moral character, suggesting that any woman who would agree to live unmarried with a man on a remote ranch can't be trusted to tell the truth. They're going to try to destroy her credibility by destroying her reputation." Rage, cold and familiar, bloomed in Elias's chest. "Let them try. We're married now, properly and legally. And anyone who wants to question Clara's character will answer to me personally. Easy, Cowboy. I'm on your side." Patricia laid a hand on his arm. "I'm just warning you so you're prepared. The trial won't be pleasant. They'll drag up every detail of what happened to her, question every decision she made, imply that somehow she brought this on herself. It's what they always do to women in these situations. The victim becomes the accused. Then I'll make sure everyone knows exactly who the real criminal is. Wallace can hide behind expensive lawyers all he wants, but at the end of the day, he's just a coward who bought and sold human beings. No amount of courtroom theatrics can change that. I believe you, and Clara believes in you. Just remember, when things get ugly, and they will, that you two have each other. That's more than most people get." Patricia smiled and patted his arm. "Now, go dance with your wife. It's your wedding day. Tomorrow's worries can wait until tomorrow." Elias took her advice, crossing to where Clara was still entertaining the children, and swept her into his arms. She laughed, startled and delighted, as he spun her away from the little ones and into an open space where they could dance properly. "What was that about?" she asked, breathless. Just reminding myself that you're mine now, legally and properly. Mrs. Elias Boone. I'm still getting used to that. Clara Boone. It sounds strange. It sounds perfect. He pulled her closer, not caring that people were watching. Thank you. For what? For saying yes. For staying. For choosing this life when you could have chosen safety and comfort in California. She reached up and touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. This is safety, Elias. You are safety and comfort and home and everything I need. California would have been running away. This is running towards something. There's a difference. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, while the fiddle played and their guests cheered and the stars began to emerge overhead. And for the first time in 2 years, Elias felt completely, utterly at peace. The party continued until late, but eventually people began to depart, some to their own ranches, others to camp near the creek for the night. Patricia had been given the bedroom, with Clara and Elias planning to spend their wedding night in the loft that Elias had converted into a proper sleeping space over the past weeks. It wasn't fancy, but it was private, and that was all that mattered. As they climbed the ladder to the loft, Clara paused and looked back at the main room where Patricia was already asleep, at the ranch that had become her home, at the life that was now hers to live. No regrets? Elias asked softly. Not a single one. She climbed the rest of the way up and reached down to help him. Come on, husband. We have the rest of our lives to start living. The weeks that followed their wedding fell into a comfortable rhythm. Patricia stayed for 2 more weeks, helping Clara set up the clinic and teaching her some of the medical techniques she'd learned from Clara's father. The building was small, just one room with an examining table, shelves for medicines, and a desk for record keeping. But it was solid and clean, and within days of opening, people started coming. First, it was Mrs. Chen from the neighboring ranch, whose youngest had a persistent cough that Clara treated with herbal tea and steam. Then old Joe Mackey, who'd been putting off having a broken finger properly set for 3 months, and finally admitted it needed attention. Word spread quickly. There was a real doctor at the Double B Ranch, and she was good at her work and didn't charge those who couldn't pay. Elias watched Clara come alive in the clinic, watched her confidence grow with each patient she helped. She had a gift for healing, just as her father had predicted, and more than that, she had compassion. She listened to her patients, really listened, and treated them with dignity regardless of their circumstances. You're staring again, Clara said one evening as she cleaned her instruments after a long day of patience. Still can't help it. You're magnificent when you're in your element. I'm covered in blood and sweat and smell like carbolic acid. That's hardly magnificent. You just saved Tommy Henderson's life by recognizing his appendix was inflamed and getting him to Doc Henderson for surgery in time. That's the definition of magnificent. She smiled, tired but satisfied. It's what I'm meant to do. I knew it even as a child watching my father work. I just didn't think I'd ever get the chance to do it myself. Well, now you have the chance and you're taking it. I'm proud of you, Clara. The trial date arrived faster than either of them wanted. They traveled to Tucson with Captain Randall as escort, staying in a small hotel near the courthouse. Patricia came with them, insisting that Clara needed family support, and Elias was grateful for her presence. The night before Clara was scheduled to testify, she barely slept, pacing their hotel room until Elias finally pulled her into his arms and held her until the shaking stopped. I can't do this, she whispered against his chest. I thought I could, but now that we're here, now that it's real, I can't face him, Elias, I can't. Yes, you can. You're the bravest person I know, Clara. You survived kidnapping, assault, and days of captivity. You climbed a cliff with cracked ribs while people shot at you. You can sit in a courtroom and tell the truth. But what if they don't believe me? What if his lawyers make me sound like a liar or worse? Then I'll stand up and tell them exactly what I saw. So will Captain Randall and his men. So will the members of the Red Scarf Gang who are testifying against Wallace to save their own necks. You're not alone in this, Clara. The truth has a lot of voices, and yours is just one of them. She pulled back to look at him, her eyes red from crying but determined. Promise me something. Anything. If it gets too hard, if I start to break in there, catch my eye. Remind me why I'm doing this. Remind me that he doesn't own me anymore, That I'm free and safe and loved? Can you do that? Every second of every minute that you're in there, I promise. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Wallace's trial had drawn attention from across the territory. Newspapers had sent reporters, curious citizens filled the gallery, and the air was thick with anticipation and judgment. Elias sat in the front row directly behind where Clara would testify, with Patricia beside him and Captain Randall on her other side. Wallace was led in by marshals, his wrists and ankles shackled. He'd lost weight during his imprisonment, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame, but his eyes still held that cold arrogance. When he saw Clara enter the courtroom, his lips curved into a slight smile that made Elias's hands curl into fists. The prosecution attorney, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Cartwright, who'd made her reputation fighting corruption, called Clara to the stand. Clara walked forward with her head high, her hand steady, as she placed it on the Bible to swear her oath. She sat in the witness chair and finally allowed herself to look at Wallace. For a moment, Elias saw fear flicker across her face. Then she looked at him, found his eyes, and he nodded. "You've got this. I'm right here." Her shoulders straightened, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "Please state your name for the record," Cartwright began. "Clara Morgan Boone." "And Mrs. Boone, can you tell the court how you came to be in Arizona Territory?" Clara told her story, all of it, from her father's death to the wagon train attack to her captivity with the Red Scarf Gang. She detailed the conditions, the fear, the way they'd moved from camp to camp selling their captives. When she described the auction in Silver Creek, her voice wavered slightly, but she pushed through. "The auctioneer said someone named Wallace had already made arrangements for me, that I was being sold to Jebediah Wallace, and that he'd paid extra to ensure no one else could bid." "But someone did bid," Cartwright prompted. "Yes. Elias, my husband, bid $500, more than anyone expected. Wallace was angry, but he couldn't do anything about it in front of the whole town." "What happened after that?" "Elias took me to his ranch. He gave me safety, medical care, and asked nothing in return. Then 3 days later, while he was at Fort Verde sending telegrams about the Red Scarf Gang, men broke into the ranch and took me. They left a message. Wallace always gets what he wants." The courtroom murmured. Wallace's lawyer, a slick man named Thornton, objected that the message was hearsay, but the judge overruled him. Elias had testified earlier about finding it written on his wall. Cartwright continued. "Can you identify the man who paid to have you kidnapped and returned to captivity?" Clara looked directly at Wallace. "Yes, that's him, Jebediah Wallace. He's sitting right there, and he's exactly who the Red Scarf Gang said he was, their partner, their financier, the man who made it all possible." Wallace's expression never changed, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise that this broken woman had found her spine, perhaps, or recognition that his money couldn't buy his way out of this. The cross-examination was brutal. Thornton went after every detail, trying to find inconsistencies, implying that Clara had been willing, suggesting that perhaps she'd been working with the gang all along and turned on them only when it was convenient. He brought up her living situation with Elias before they were married, used words like improper and questionable morality, and convenient testimony. Each accusation was a knife, and Elias watched Clara flinch with every cut. But she didn't break. She answered every question honestly, refused to be baited into anger, and when Thornton pushed too hard, implying that maybe she'd wanted to be sold, wanted the attention, she leaned forward and spoke directly to him. "Mr. Thornton, I was beaten, starved, and sold like an animal. I watched children torn from their families. I saw good people murdered for trying to resist. And your client, that man sitting there, made it all possible because he wanted to add to his already obscene wealth. You can try to destroy my character all you want, but it won't change the truth. Jebediah Wallace is a slaver and a murderer, and everyone in this courtroom knows it." The gallery erupted in applause. The judge gavelled for order, but even he looked satisfied. Thornton had no more questions. When Clara stepped down from the witness stand, Elias met her at the gate and pulled her into his arms, not caring about courtroom protocol or proper behavior. She collapsed against him, shaking with relief and exhaustion, and he held her while Patricia rubbed her back and murmured reassurances. The trial lasted another week, with testimony from gang members, evidence presented by the prosecution, and desperate attempts by Wallace's defense to create reasonable doubt. But in the end, the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Wallace to life in prison. No possibility of parole to be served at the territorial prison in Yuma, where the heat was brutal and mercy was scarce. As the marshals led him away, Wallace looked directly at Clara one last time. But whatever power he'd once held over her was gone. She met his gaze steadily, and when he finally looked away, beaten, she turned to Elias with tears of relief streaming down her face. "It's really over," she whispered. "It's finally, truly over." "It is. You did it, Clara. You faced him down and won." They returned to the Double B Ranch a week later, leaving Patricia in Tucson to catch the stage back to California. She'd made Clara promise to visit within the year and to write regularly, and Clara had agreed to both. "Take care of my niece," Patricia told Elias as they said their goodbyes, "though I suspect she's more likely to take care of you." "Probably true," Elias admitted. "She's the stronger one." "That's because you give her the space to be strong. That's no small gift, Elias Boone." The ranch felt like home when they returned, more than it ever had before. Clara threw herself back into her work at the clinic, and her reputation spread beyond Silver Creek to neighboring communities. People traveled for hours to see the woman doctor at the Double B, and more often than not, Elias would come in from working the cattle to find a line of patients waiting patiently outside her door. Winter came, mild by most standards, but cold enough that snow dusted the mountains and ice formed on the creek in the mornings. They spent evenings by the fire, Clara reading medical journals that she'd subscribed to with money from her aunt, Elias working on tack that needed mending, or plans for expanding the ranch come spring. One evening in late January, nearly 4 months after their wedding, Clara set down her journal and looked at Elias with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I need to tell you something," she said. His heart clenched. That tone never preceded good news. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think it is. But it's going to change things, and I wanted you to know before anyone else." She took a breath. "I'm pregnant." Time seemed to stop. Elias stared at her, processing the words, and then joy, pure, uncomplicated joy, flooded through him. "You're sure?" "I'm a doctor, Elias. I'm sure." She smiled tentatively. "Are you happy? I know we didn't plan this so soon, and there's still so much work to do with the clinic." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around. "Happy? Clara, I'm beyond happy. There aren't even words. A baby. Our baby." She laughed, the sound full of relief and joy. "So you're not upset?" "Upset? This is the best news I've had since you agreed to marry me. When? When will the baby come?" "Late summer, I think. August, maybe early September." She pulled back to look at him. "Are you really ready for this? For midnight feedings and dirty diapers and all the chaos that comes with a baby? Are you?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but excited. I never thought I'd have this. A home, a husband, a child on the way. After everything that happened, I didn't think I deserved it." "You deserve everything good this world has to offer, Clara Boone, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued working in the clinic almost until the end, only stopping when Elias and Doc Henderson finally convinced her that standing for hours while 8 months pregnant probably wasn't wise. She chafed at the restriction, but eventually agreed to see patients only a few hours each morning, spending afternoons resting and preparing for the baby's arrival. Elias built a cradle from oak wood, carving small flowers into the sides to match the ones Clara had worn in her hair at their wedding. He cleaned out the small storage room off the bedroom and converted it into a nursery, painting the walls a cheerful yellow that Clara had chosen. And he found himself talking to the baby, his hand on Clara's swelling belly, telling stories about Margaret and his parents and the ranch, promising that this child would grow up surrounded by love and safety and endless possibility. Labor started on a sweltering night in late August, 3 weeks before Doc Henderson had predicted. Clara woke Elias at midnight with a hand on his shoulder and 3 calm words. "It's time, Elias." He panicked. There was no other word for it. Despite all their preparation, despite knowing this day was coming, He completely lost his composure. He rushed around the house, grabbing things at random, finally realizing he was holding a saddle blanket and a coffee pot and had no idea why. Clara, in the early stages of labor and still capable of humor, laughed at him. "Breathe, Elias. I'm the doctor, remember? I know what I'm doing." "But you can't deliver your own baby." "No, which is why you're going to ride to town and get Doc Henderson. Right now, before I change my mind and decide to do this alone out of sheer stubbornness." He rode like the devil was chasing him, covering the 10 miles to Silver Creek in record time and pounding on Doc Henderson's door until the older man emerged, grumbling about young husbands and false alarms. But when Elias explained that Clara had insisted it was real labor, Henderson grabbed his bag without further complaint and followed Elias back to the ranch. The labor lasted 14 hours. Elias stayed with Clara the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, and trying not to wince when she squeezed his fingers hard enough to make bones creak during contractions. Doc Henderson checked on her progress periodically, assured them everything was normal, and stayed close in case complications arose. As the sun began to set on what had been the longest day of Elias's life, Clara's efforts intensified. Henderson positioned himself to catch the baby, giving instructions that Clara followed with the same determination she brought to everything in her life. And then, as golden light slanted through the bedroom window, a new voice joined the world, a baby's cry, strong and indignant. "It's a girl," Henderson announced, holding up the squalling infant. A beautiful, healthy girl with a remarkable set of lungs. Clara laughed and cried simultaneously, reaching for her daughter with shaking arms. Henderson placed the baby on Clara's chest, and Elias watched his wife fall instantly, completely in love. The baby quieted immediately at her mother's touch, her tiny fist curling around Clara's finger. "Hello, little one," Clara whispered. "Hello, Margaret Rose?" Elias felt his throat close. They'd discussed names, but Clara had insisted that if they had a daughter, she should carry Margaret's name. "She gave me you," Clara had explained. "By dying, she freed you to save me. I want to honor that." Now, watching his wife hold their daughter, Margaret Rose Boone, named for the past and the future, Elias felt the last piece of his healing slot into place. The grief for Margaret would never completely disappear, but it had transformed into something gentler, something that coexisted peacefully with the love he felt for Clara and this new life they'd created together. "Do you want to hold her?" Clara asked, and carefully transferred the baby to Elias's arms. She was so small, so impossibly fragile, with a downy covering of auburn hair that matched her mother's and eyes that would probably be green once they settled on a color. She looked up at Elias with what he swore was recognition, and he fell completely, irrevocably in love. "Hello, Maggie Rose," he murmured. "I'm your papa. I'm going to teach you to ride and rope and read the stars. I'm going to protect you and love you and make sure you grow up knowing that you can be anything you want to be. Welcome to the family, little one. We've been waiting for you." The baby made a small sound, not quite a coo, not quite a cry, and yawned hugely, already bored with the world and ready for sleep. Elias laughed and carefully returned her to Clara's arms, leaning down to kiss first his daughter's forehead and then his wife's. "You did it," he said to Clara. "You brought her safely into the world. You're amazing." "We did it," Clara corrected. "We brought her into the world, into this family, into this life we've built together. She's ours, Elias. Ours." Doc Henderson cleaned up, gave Clara instructions for recovery and nursing, and accepted Elias's profuse thanks with good grace. "You've got yourself a good family here, Boone," he said as he prepared to leave. "That little girl is going to grow up loved and strong, just like her mama. You take care of them." "Every day of my life," Elias promised. The weeks that followed were exhausting and joyful in equal measure. Maggie Rose proved to have her mother's determination and her father's stubbornness, wanting to eat every 2 hours, regardless of the time of day, and protesting loudly when her needs weren't immediately met. Clara took to motherhood with the same competence she brought to medicine, while Elias discovered a capacity for gentleness he hadn't known he possessed. Patients still came to the clinic, but Clara cut her hours dramatically, seeing only emergencies and regular patients who'd become friends. The rest of her time was devoted to Maggie Rose, nursing her, changing her, singing to her in the evenings while Elias played his father's old guitar. One evening in late September, as the heat finally broke and autumn began to assert itself, Elias found Clara standing by the window with Maggie Rose asleep in her arms. The setting sun painted them both in shades of gold, and Elias stood in the doorway just watching, memorizing the moment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Clara turned, smiling. "I'm thinking about how different my life could have been. If you hadn't bid on me that day, if you hadn't come after me when they took me back, if you hadn't given me the space and time to heal and discover who I wanted to be. I'd be dead, or worse, or at best living a half-life in California wondering what might have been. Instead, you're here, healing people and raising our daughter in this beautiful valley. Seems like you chose well." "We chose well," Clara corrected, echoing her words from the night Maggie was born. "This isn't just my life or your life anymore, Elias. It's our life. All three of us building something beautiful from what started as the worst day of my life." She carried Maggie Rose to the cradle Elias had built and laid her down gently. The baby stirred but didn't wake, already adapting to the rhythms of ranch life. Clara returned to Elias and took his hand, leading him out to the porch where they could watch the sun finish its descent. "Thank you," she said, not for the first time and certainly not for the last. "Thank you for seeing an angel where everyone else saw merchandise. Thank you for giving me back my life." "You gave me mine too," Elias replied. "After Margaret died, I thought I was done. Thought I'd just exist until I didn't anymore. Then I lifted that sack and saw your face, and something woke up inside me. You saved me as much as I saved you, Clara. Maybe more." They stood together on the porch as stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had watched the worst moments of their lives and now bore witness to the best. The ranch spread out before them, the clinic where Clara healed the sick, the barn where Smoke and the other horses nickered softly, the fields where cattle grazed peacefully, and inside the house, the nursery where their daughter slept. A year ago, Elias Boone had been a widower going through the motions of living, his heart buried with his first wife, his future stretching ahead empty and gray. A year ago, Clara Morgan had been a captive, stripped of dignity and hope, facing a future too terrible to contemplate. Now they were husband and wife, parents to a beautiful daughter, partners in building a life that honored the past while embracing the future. The angel who'd been auctioned with a sack over her head had found her freedom, her purpose, and her home. And the cowboy who'd lifted that sack had found his second chance at love and a reason to believe that even in the darkest moments, redemption was possible. "Look," Clara said, pointing toward the creek where fireflies had begun their nightly dance. "Maggie will love those when she's old enough to chase them. We'll teach her together, along with riding and healing and how to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." "Especially when it's hard," Clara agreed. "The world needs more people who do the right thing, not because it's easy, but because it's right." Sounds like something a wise woman would say. "I learned it from a stubborn cowboy who risked everything to save a stranger." Elias pulled her close, his arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. Inside, Maggie Rose made a small sound in her sleep, not distress, just the sound of a baby dreaming. They listened together, these two people who'd found each other in the dust and darkness of a town square auction, and built from that terrible moment something stronger and truer than either could have imagined. "I love you, Clara Boone," Elias said quietly. "I love you too, Elias. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after. For as long as we both shall live." The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The creek whispered its endless song. And on the porch of the Double B Ranch, two people held each other close while their daughter slept peacefully inside, surrounded by love and safety and the promise of countless tomorrows. From auction block to altar, from captivity to freedom, from despair to hope. Their story was written in the dust and blood and tears of the Arizona Territory, but it ended in joy. And years later, when Maggie Rose was old enough to understand, they would tell her how they met, how they survived, and how they built a family from the ashes of everything they'd lost. They would tell her that even in the darkest moments, when evil seems to triumph and hope seems foolish, love can bloom like rain after drought. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what's right despite it, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Even a woman with a sack over her head standing on an auction block, waiting for someone brave enough to see the angel beneath. The sun slipped below the horizon, darkness claimed the valley, and inside the small adobe house, a family slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but facing them together, strong in the knowledge that they'd already survived the worst, and come through it not just intact, but transformed. The angel had found her wings, the cowboy had found his purpose, and together they'd found home.